Well, hey everybody, this is Jason, and I'm here again with Allison and Leo, and we just wanted to do a follow up, kind of catch up on where we're all at and looking into Web3 and Leo actually has a new article out on Silicon Icarus titled "Natural Asset Managers: How Decentralized Ledger Technology Will Drive the Ecosystem Services Sector." So yeah, it's going to be a little bit hodgepodge. We've got a lot of different things to talk about here. Um, but yeah, thanks for joining us. So, hey, Allison. Hey, Leo.
Hello.
Hey, Jason. Hey.
Well, we
So,
thought we'd maybe do it like a begin, like just
Oh,
sort of an
yeah.
update. Like maybe it makes sense to
Yeah,
start with Leo since you mentioned Leo's new article.
sure.
yeah, sure.
Um, so pretty much for the last, I don't know, for the last little while, maybe 6 months, I've been looking into kind of this concept called ecosystem services, which, probably the most popular idea that people are familiar with is carbon credits. So the idea that um, you can measure and quantify some activity of nature that people decide is good or bad, and then either providing payment for that process or, like in the case of carbon credits, like outright making it an asset that can be traded in some way. And then seeing how, especially in the carbon credit market and ecosystem services in general, they're pretty much the whole sector is converging to blockchain technology or like distributed ledger on some level, uh, which I don't feel like is largely understood or realized. And I'd say, like in the article, I kind of point out two different, I don't know how I'd say it, like segments or momentums. One coming from traditional institutions like the World Bank or USDA and other like large establishment, um, like international
BlackRock.
things. Yeah, BlackRock, the
Yes,
EU,
people.
UN,
Yeah.
all these sorts of things. And then also the more like the Web3, the crypto space, and their like, collectivist and like often talk in languages or directly like talk about being anti-imperial or trying to empower people in like relationship with one another in the land and stuff. And then like what I'm trying to point out is how those two forces, like that traditional like imperial force and this like supposedly um, like alternative path where people are trying to take care of each other and power each other, are really doing like the exact
Going
same
the same
thing
place.
using the exact same talent. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. So this is like this is kind of part one. There'll probably be a few more installments.
Well, I really liked the both the laying out the particular elements of the program, but also the narrative structure, because I think like that's really critical for people to be able to navigate the spaces, seeing like being able to assess the narratives and like see the like where are they taking us and how are they using language and imagery and like this idea of belonging to something positive to lead people and obscure what is actually happening. Because the sensor, maybe you could speak a little bit to like the automation of the environmental modeling, because I think for me that's the
Yeah.
core. Like if we weren't doing that, like if we weren't blockchaining the world, like there might be some aspects of this that I could possibly get on board with, but not outside in robot, you know.
Yeah, definitely. So like this entire system, the whole like the conceptual basis of this is quantifying nature and using all of the technologies possible to do that, which is probably the most heavily used is satellite imagery. And basically just, I mean, satellites, IoT sensors, and then human input like into computers, and then using that data over time based on like constructed scientific standards and like reference models in order to generate ecosystem services and to define like what one is and where it starts, where it ends, and like have defined standards around how that data is collected. But the main point being that it's all computerized, it's all involving these large scale digital models, and that you can't like, it just isn't possible to do this without that, or it's not like,
they couldn't scale. Like if it wasn't automated, you couldn't do it at a global level, and that the standards are so central.
And since it's all based on quantification and measurement, like it's just that has to be automated. Like you just said, there's not any room for this where it's, I know, I mean, sometimes I've thought about like is there like a positive way of doing something like this, or because there is, we want to take care of the land, obviously, like everyone agrees with that, and just how do we do that? Or people just do it. A lot of people just do it, and that's like,
but it's trustless.
But this is just like this is trustless and completely devoid of like what we would call actual connection, or like intuitive connection that comes from working on the land for years and years and being able to feel the cycles, see things. It's just not stuff that can be reduced to data. But
I think that point too about like the fact that there are real problems that they're addressing, and that's how they hook people, because you hear it and you're like, oh my gosh, so we got a train coming, huh?
There's a train. Sorry.
But that's the challenge that I've had, is just like, acknowledging the real and very serious issues that we have with our ecology, and with a lot of the issues that are purportedly being addressed here. And then you have like people from the left like ignoring like the fact that this is really centered around markets, and it's really, there's this technology, and there's a lot of things that are just like about it that are just kind of, I would argue, fraudulent, in the ideas that again, the technology and the automation involved with supposedly doing this is not ecological at all. But then you have people that are more conservative that just like dismiss the environmental concerns out of hand, and they say, oh, it's that. So it's like you end up like not getting people to come together and like actually dealing with the thing in all of its facets,
Definitely. And I'd say like a big part of it too is, I think why a lot of people are hopping onto this is there's money, It's like you're just getting paid for, all you have to really do is sign, some contracts and have a service provider like use satellite imagery to look at your land and say how much carbon you sequestered, or, soil, like soil organic matter is in there, and these different measurements, like, and not really have to change that much of what you do in some big way and get paid for it. So there's just, money for farmers or people that, like conservation groups or whatnot, that just wasn't there before, and they don't really have to do all that much different besides just sign on to it. So right. It's hard to, and obviously there's very few, I don't remember the numbers, but like small farms and stuff have been struggling for a really long time.
Well, then Alison talks a lot about like just the gambling piece of all this, and so you get that whole the gamification of it as another aspect that, the idea that this is going to be some pure thing is pretty absurd. I mean, we already have a history, of looking at carbon credits and the markets. I mean, people have been talking about the fraud around that for a long time. That's not even a new thing.
But what's kind of hard too is that that's always used as an excuse to like move deeper into the
We need more
technology, and that
transparency. Yeah.
more
Accountability.
transparency and better standards for the MRV is what's called the measurement, response, and verification. I think I have the R messed up, but it's basically the process of how carbon credits are like issued and verified and stuff. And they're always saying all these articles on the blockchain based ones are from Vera or Gold Standard, which were two of the largest carbon credit standard agencies. That it's like, yeah, we just need to make the MRV systems better and more transparent. And then basically the whole thesis, especially in like the crypto space, is that the better that the data is, or more transparent and verifiable, the more valuable it is.
Can you scroll back to those colors, Jason? Can we just leave it there for a second?
Sure.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, you're good. What was I saying? And that which is sort of interesting too from like an AI and machine learning perspective, is that the data that is more like that they can say is more concrete or more verifiable, has more provenance, is more valuable computationally, is interesting. And then also more valuable in terms of like in the markets and investors having like confidence that carbon credit is gonna like withstand over time and isn't like double counted or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, that was interesting. Alison brought up the Hedera, clip that we have some of that stuff, but it's, providence. It was a big chunk of that, is being able to, we need to know, the order of things. Who had what first, who said what first, but I mean that the providence seems to be a pretty big issue here.
It's a time machine.
So, yeah.
Prediction. Totally. It's the ledger, right? You can roll it back and make predictive
and
forward.
That's what, like these data systems for all this ecological stuff is all about that, having the data in space and time and how things have changed and the order of it, like throughout, and people's interactions with that. And that's so.
Well, the reason I just wanted to stop on like this little section, like with the base, because you talked about like developing the base layers, so I'm sure there's depth of data, right? Like they need a first pass to get the stuff on the blockchain or to get it documented. And then over time, like those layers of data deepen, right? And become more interconnected. Mm-hmm. And back when we did our series on the atomic ecologies and like the beginning stages of like man in the biosphere, and I always thought it was really interesting that, at least back to when did that start? The early 70s? I don't know if it predated that, if it was like Cold War bubbling up.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah. And that it was the both, like it's people situated in an environment, and within like the cybernetics, because later on we'll talk a little bit about the collectivo, some of the clips, but I was really interested at one point. He's like, oh yeah, no, we're a cybernetics lab. Like you pretty much just said, he's like, yeah, no, we're totally a cybernetics lab. And I'm like, oh, like people don't even know what cybernetics is really. But it's this interplay between humans and nature. And then to me, it feels like nature, like the GIS stuff is almost the game board. Like they're laying out the game board in this moment, of which we are tokens that'll be moved about, virtually or realistically on the game board. But it's a game board. And then also like what I saw with Pay for Success Finance, and this was more around not the natural capital, but the human capital side, the whole, again, narrative construct being said, like, we're going to get away from GDP. Like that's too limiting just to talk about money. Now we're going to talk about well-being. We're going to talk about happiness. We're going to put metrics on and on the surface, people are like, great. Because like, I'd like to feel cared about, or I'd like for you to think, care about what I think or what my well-being is. But once you realize it's the baseline cost offset for all of these things. So like, what is the well-being of humanity in relation to how nature is being managed? Which, yeah, of course, But then when you become a sensor and it becomes full of sensors, and then that's being managed cybernetically, it's really invasive. And then it becomes, to me, like this Bentham philosophic calculus, the panopticon, right? Like, oh, we'll guarantee that we have trustworthy management of your happiness, but you have to live in the panopticon, okay? Like, that's the agreement, like sign on the bottom.
Exactly.
We're not even like, we're not even giving consent at this point. But anyway, that's why I wanted to talk about sort of as the game board, because you were really clear in your article about like developing the base layers and then looking at the flow of services through people into the environment.
Yeah, no, you got it exactly. Yeah, I mean, with how they describe it, it's like, and in the Collectivo, which we'll talk about later, it's this, it's usually hexagons too. It's just like, okay, the world is reduced literally to like Settlers of Catan hexagons, and then they build the data on top of that and people's interactions, and like the same idea of the cost offsets for like social impact finance and stuff. It's the same exact thing. And the ecosystem services, they need a baseline and like a reference layer, and then based on the changes to that or something else, and that creates the new service, or the better data or whatnot. So.
Well, and there's a weird logic to like how this plays out that I saw on the human capital side, was that like in the education space, they would have something called like SLOs, student learning objectives. And so you would have like, they had this whole thing where they would test children on material they hadn't learned to create the baseline. When really it just like stressed kids out because they didn't know it, because they weren't taught it. And so they were test on something they totally couldn't know. And it made a crappy baseline, right? And so like, and I even remember like when my kid was in gym, like they would do a baseline before you had done any training of like running the, mile or whatever. And then they would write that down. And so the incentive was to make the baseline as terrible as possible, so that even a modest, slightly less terrible thing would look really good. And what I realized, like with the environmental, on the natural capital side, is like until this thing goes in, like actually there's a huge incentive to devastate the ecosystems, so that when you come in, like you could say, look, we improved it. Like, yeah, we did cut that forest down 5 years ago, but look, now we're planting a whole bunch of eucalyptus, or now we're, whatever. And then like,
yeah, exactly.
It's really messed up.
Yeah, the whole game, the like gamification of it, that's, go ahead, Al. But I would.
Oh, no, sorry. I was going to say what you got it.
Yeah, I will always be gamified as long as there's a financial interest in there. You want people to like care about the ecology because they care about the ecology. You're never going to get there through some sort of carrot and, the carrot and the stick. You're just never going to get there. You're always going to have people, if there's money to be made, people are going to figure out a way around that, leaving aside the fact that they're doing all this harm, just creating the technology, to suppose, even if you gave it the benefit of the doubt that it was actually for what they claim it's for, which it's, I would argue it's not. But yeah, that's all I was going to say, was like, yeah, gamified.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then I was just going to add what you both kind of already said, but if like cities and shopping malls and all this stuff where we've just cut everything down already, now you can make money by planting another tree, and then say, yeah, Detroit. And it's like, oh, okay, now you can generate carbon cost offsets for.
Well, I made a comment on it. There was a video where they were talking about, giving people tokens for picking up trash. And I was like, I made the comment that like, yeah, people need tokens in order to survive. You're going to see trash just that wouldn't normally be there just suddenly start appearing at night that they can come pick it up. So people have an excuse. I've spent a lot of time in the hood, Kensington, but just seeing all the, people get creative, and I don't, you can't blame them or whatever, but people in those situations, in order to survive, come up with pretty clever ways to even on that level to figure out ways to game the system, which I don't blame them, because they don't have any real opportunities available to them. but yeah, you're just yeah, the whole financial incentive thing is just not the way through. And that's the problem, is like all of this is based on the assumption that games are good, gamification of life, that markets and the economic system, they're not actually addressing why we're in the position that we're in to begin with. Ignore the military, the role that the military is playing in all of this. That's the discussions about all these things. It's absent that the fact that this is, that then they're still there. It wasn't just like the origins of it, but the military is still there behind the scenes.
Well, and
Yeah,
I
and
feel
I
like
feel like
that's the Cold War. I was just going to say, like, that's part of what I was like, the installation of the space satellite infrastructure, like, that happened during the Cold War, that's now like framed as like peace, right? Or that's the narrative that will, like, oh, we did all of this stuff in space so that we can save the planet, and yay. But like, it actually is just another form of warfare. We just don't recognize it that way yet.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like one area where the ecological stuff is more visibly just a part of the whole military like framework is the risk analysis that like primarily the insurance companies are really involved with. So all this ecological data and like large scale simulations of the environment, the oceans, and weather and land and all that, that's all being used as like to basically develop insurance contracts and deals for these natural assets and ecosystem services that now have a financial value to them. And so you see, like, it's not in this article, but probably the next one will come out will mostly be about the insurance industry and that whole paradigm. But what I'd written about in the past, the Matiga Solutions working with the Danish Red Cross on a volcano catastrophe bond, where they basically, Matiga Solutions was the modeler, like the simulation maker, to determine like what level of volcano eruption should elicit how much payment by the like insurance contract, and creating all those thresholds and that sort of thing. And they just are a military contractor and like work with a lot of like European military industrial type organizations. They're also a part of they were sort of incubated out of Microsoft, the Microsoft planetary computer. They have like that whole initiative, and yeah, so there's a lot there.
This morning I was looking at this Conductor platform, which is CONDTRR, which is, it's actually they're so tricky, because when you try to do an online search for it, they'll say, do you mean Conductor OR? Like, so I think they chose that name to actually make it difficult to search for, because it's actually it's not a name that shows up very easily. And it was really, until you mentioned that about the risk, I went to their YouTube channel and I was looking, and a lot of them were about risk management. So like, that's military simulation risk modeling. But like, I do wonder the extent to which the big insurance companies are like hand in hand behind the scenes with the military simulations. And specifically some of the narratives, and I haven't watched the whole thing. There was like a 2-hour presentation, but they were talking about managing risk in terms of like activism. And one of the short clips, again, it's supposed to be a crisis simulation model, right? Like, none of these are, the implication is like, they would never interfere in actual social media. All they do is like, they create a sandbox to, give to companies and the military to play out these scenarios. But, that's the story they tell. But one of the scenarios was specifically about like a beverage bottling company and activists protesting water. Like either, I don't know if it's contamination of water or privatization of water. And then the whole simulation was how they would manage and contain activist sentiment against perceived like inappropriate corporate undertakings around water and natural water systems in that. And again, it was like very specifically managing the risk through social, like in the simulation, to dampen down, the activism. But like, if you substituted, another, branded, red and white branded, soda company, right, that also does water, like you could swap it out. It's kind of fascinating to think about, like, they're so far ahead of managing us, like activists. And I did it myself, like when I first started doing my education work in like 2015, 16, I got a Twitter account and I thought I was being an activist. But you're not meant to know about these other, like, that this isn't our game. Like, it never was our game. It was always a military game. So anyway, I just, when you said risk again, like, I was like, oh, that was all over the stuff today. It was all risk modeling.
Should I bring up that clip?
Yeah.
I'm trying to.
Well, I don't want to interrupt Leo till he's done. Like,
no, that's
okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we can come back.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Yeah, I am curious because I didn't get a chance to check out the conductor thing that you sent this morning, and that did seem.
But I'll just say, like, since this image is up, like, essentially, again, their framing is that, like, they're just creating like sandbox enclosed scenarios for companies and NATO and the military, but that they have like profiles and they have narrative arcs and this pattern of life. And then you can see it's a very odd choice of this DNA modeling, that you have the facilitator who literally, like, I guess has eyeglasses on, but looks like a bandit. Looks like she has a bandit mask on, like at the keyboard with the mask face. And then the player is at their own desk, like interfacing with this, like, and there are cascades of events that happen depending on your decision tree. So there are all, it's like, that's part of the risk modeling, is like, this situation comes up. Do you do this, or this? And then depending on that, it's choose your own adventure, I guess. But if you imagine that being connected to a supercomputer, in which this maybe comes out of the sandbox, isn't actually in the real world, and is actually through managed media campaigns, like, and then it gets into the wild outside the hands of people. And the other thing is, there were, one of the clips was talking about activating an Amazon Web Services Internet of Things button, which I'm assuming is like an actuator in the real world. It didn't actually have much text. It was just short. But they, I'm like, clearly, because Amazon Web Services, same thing, right? Oh, they sell you books, but they're also a military database software. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, what happens when you're actually, life becomes the game? Like, that you're not at your desk, you're actually, getting on an elevator and you have to have a swipe card. And then there's a Internet of thing that either happens or doesn't happen, in terms of access or no access. And yeah, so, and this is, anyway, managed happiness and well-being. But it could just as easily go out into the food forest and take pictures of the bananas, right? And then earn your gamified credit by feeding that back into the impact verification DAO software.
Definitely. That makes me think of, too, like with that Red Cross, the volcano catastrophe bond that I just mentioned. It's about, like, a big part of it, too, was the response to the catastrophe and using community currency, like essentially doing like catastrophe community currency as like disaster aid in those situations, which is pretty much this, in a sense. Like, there's a set of decisions and circumstances tied around digital technologies and responding to like life situations and stuff, and then feeding that back into the larger scale simulations. And that's like the thing with the Matiga solution stuff. It's not just simulations of like the environment. It has to be of the people and the economy too, because that's what they're simulating for. So it's man in the biosphere, it's people in the environment, and then like modeling the economy and the flows and the just the various stuff that goes through and how that works, and how a volcano erupting would change that, and then doing all the disaster aid and sort of like interventions based on that, which is funded by the insurance contract, which
Yeah, and I just brought this video up too, but if people want to, we talked about this about 5 months ago, and so there's some pretty good information on this one. It's called Parametric Insurance, Web3 based surveillance of all things, and this was Alison, Leo, and I, and he'd done an article, so I recommend checking that one out as well.
Yeah, and that's about what I was just talking about too. So it's the same
right
project.
All right. So, do we want to go into some more of the conductor stuff, or what do you guys think?
Do you mind if I just do a little update on what I'm working on?
Yeah, go for it.
It kind of would be like, did you have a chance to say like the main stuff, Leo, for your article?
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's
okay.
that's pretty much it. There's something that came into my head that I think something I wanted to respond about what you said, but I don't remember it. So it's just keep going.
Well, I think so. So what I've been working on, I have this series that's a bit scattered, like my brain, but I'm trying to pin it down so I can think about it better. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk today, is just to be like, I have all these thoughts. They involve Web3 and a lot of things. And yeah, so I have this series that I started. It's now like I've written about 74 pages, but most of it isn't actually out. It's like there's 4 sections. And essentially it was an article about crypto and offshore finance and sort of corruption and online poker that Raul had written for Silicon Icarus. And at the time I read it, it triggered a lot of thoughts that I had about Cold War game theory. And just thinking about like the historic, we're talking about a lot about gaming, right? Like gamification, but ultimately, like I think it needs to be understood within the context of Cold War simulation modeling, like high level applied mathematics and modeling, which, we're entering a moment of ubiquitous sensing technology that's kind of crazy, the degree to which the modeling that they could do in 1945 and with their, the Macy Cybernetics conferences and all of that, and like what they could do today. And so I thought, wow, so the fact, Leo, you've talked in a number of your articles and our conversations about that this data isn't just going for the finance part, it's actually for machine learning too. So as we live in the panopticon, we're actually training the prison to be a better prison, kind of like, or a more resilient, less anti-fragile containment device, I guess, is sort of, and so this series that I'm sort of in is looking at poker and this idea of gaming and prediction, and also about like decision theory, and then what this maybe attempting emergent artificial general intelligence thing needs, which is like to try to pin down human ingenuity, like spontaneity, creativity. It's and oftentimes I think it is all of that in us in relation to our environment, right? So it's not just it's us with one another, but it's also us with the natural system. And as best I can tell, this mechanical system, it can find patterns, it can replicate, it can mirror, but it can't actually be. And I don't know, Leo, there was like one really good line about in your article. Can we bring up the article again for a second? Like it's near the beginning about the fur and the fish.
Both leverage our deteriorating dance with the mountain, streams, ocean, fish, fungi, and fur to sell us a new rhythm. However, this new beat, shaped by the doctrine of mathematics, is designed to channel our laughter, spontaneity, despair, and mundane routines into engineered circuits. These circuits project reflections of our movement, light, and thoughts in a digital version of reality. Vast computer networks, trillions of communicating circuits, serve as the bones. By detailing the specifics of how this process is unfolding, we can begin to grapple with reality and face ourselves in the present.
Yeah. And that like really hit home for me, because like I think that's the piece that we hold on to, right? Like it's trying really hard, but I don't think it's going to get to where I don't think it's going to be fully realized. like, we shouldn't
No.
just sit back and not do it and not try to explain it to people. But like, anyway, so that's like, and one of the things I really wanted to talk about, and maybe the next thing we could do, Jason, and it would be great, like, if you want to update people with sort of like where you're at in terms of like what you've been sort of thinking, you know, too, is the interspecies game, because there's an 8-minute clip that really lays out one of the things I wanted to talk to people with you guys about is like developing a deeper, like trying to find better ways to talk about Web3 in ways that go like beyond the cryptocurrency NFT conversations that so many people are having, especially around the FTX stuff, and then understanding it as cybernetics and as governance and as tokenization, both for of translation of value, but also signals, like using these tokens as a signaling process, and the way in which this will weirdly mesh with like democracy, like reimagining what democracy and communal participation is, and reimagining possibly signals within like gene editing or frequency editing, like there's some sort of biochemical frequency-based process. I think they imagine like as we emit our signal of like who we are, what we value, that there will be some intermediary process that will be enacted upon us, either with or without our perceived consent into this. So I think this interspecies game clip really touches on the narrative, which was what was so lovely, you know, in addition to laying out the particulars of Leo's intro to that series, is that they've got a story in their back pocket, and they're hitting it pretty hard, right? And they're going to take you down the road so far that you're not like, if you're not aware, it's going to be hard to get back. And it's a road that they've managed that's going the same place as the, you know, BlackRock, IBM, you know, Department of Energy, DARPA, you know, EU, whatever, exactly. Road. The same road. It's like a wine. They're going to take you down the primrose path, let me just say. And if we at least sort of say, or the aconite path, maybe that's the crazy gaming studio. Yeah, the aconite path. Don't go down the aconite path. Yeah, stay like dandelions, like find the path. Like my mom sent me this card. Isn't this so sweet?
Oh, that's cute.
Dandelions. So
yeah, that's really cute.
So anyway, so that's
yeah.
sort of
So should we play?
Yeah, let's. I haven't actually watched this yet. So yeah, let's.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I feel like it's a good time to.
Good. Yeah,
so I don't think we need to do all 8 minutes straight through. Like, let's do a couple minutes and then pause and see what we like. Maybe do a round robin of what we heard.
Okay.
And just for an intro, so Leo and I, gosh, was it like last summer? We did. This was part of a debrief we did for the Silicon Icarus podcast, and that podcast touched on a number of different things, but like this was, I think, the core thing we wanted to talk about was an interactive game centered in ostensibly parks. Now, at the time, there was a Medium article about this. And at the bottom, there was a clip for essentially a pitch. They were sort of pitching their project to Sovereign Nature. This is Curve Labs, and maybe Levo, you could say something about that, and Weave. They were pitching part of a pitch team, and I guess they got funding to do an implementation pilot. And so when I went back, I pulled this short clip of their pitch, and it really to me speaks to, again, the intersection of financialization of nature, but according to the Primrose Path narrative, democratic participation, the perception of commoning, but actually like privatizing the commons, and like behavior management and gamification. And against this backdrop, and before we start, maybe Leo, you can say something about Curve Labs and your next phase of work, and Trent McConaughey. But Trent McConaughey of Ocean Protocol was one of the judges. He doesn't show up in this clip, but this is part of a 2-hour presentation with a number of different teams. And I think he was one of the judges. And a lot of these people are based in and around Berlin. So that's my intro.
Okay. And then if when you want to cut to talk, just
maybe
let me know.
Let Leo say a couple things about Curve Labs.
Yeah, so Curve Labs, like, no, I'd say like if you go to their website, the first thing in like big letters that comes up says, "We build digital souls," and they also, yeah, and they describe themselves as like essentially a cybernetics laboratory, or they literally use those words. And they're in part funded by, I know they've gotten funding from the EU Horizon 2020 initiative, but they're basically like a Web3. Yeah, there you go. um, like a Web3 lab that work on a number of different projects, and one of the ones they're involved with quite heavily is called Collectivo, which is basically one of the Web3 projects that does all this ecological asset tokenization and governance and like local economic systems, and selling carbon credits and other like ecological data, and like they're very much representative of like the Web3 side of the whole ecosystem services paradigm. So Curve Labs is building that, and then they're also highly involved in like Cello, which I've written about quite a bit, which is also very representative of the Web3 side.
Well, and it's interesting because I'll just say, like, I have a friend who was very interested in the Medium article, because they're actually in it. It doesn't come, although the guy has like a star thingy come off of his head, so that's a bit odd. But like, there's the Medium article has a lot more esoteric sort of language. Like, they're literally talking about doing rituals in the park, and I don't know, do you say sigils? Like sigils and oracles, right, and rituals and
is this it?
You know, yeah, that's it. You know, if you read through, there's quite a, I mean, when I first read it, I was like, whoa, this is a little strange. It's centered on a tree of life. So that has its own sort of, you know, but the tree of life essentially is a DAO. Like, what they're talking about, it isn't a real tree. It's an organization that is structured as a tree. And so she was very interested in this. And so she sent it to her, like, a relative who was sort of a systems architect at a, you know, a high level computing firm in Seattle, you know, someone who knew his way around the block, you would think. And this person responded like, well, we looked at it around our office, and we did not know what to make of this at all. We think it's a joke. Like, we think this just must be an April Fool's joke or something. Like, this is dumb. Like, it's dumb. It's a joke. And I think, and this is someone who would consider themselves an expert. And I think then it's a challenge because, again, look, it has 52 followers. Like, you look at some of these things like Protocol Labs, and their YouTube channels have, you know, 5,000 subscribers or like 200 views on a video. It's not the IBM, right? It's not Andreessen Horowitz. It's not Blackstone. And yet I feel like these are the people who are weaving the infrastructure and doing all of the pilots, so that, like, when the time comes, it will all be going online, and it is very well connected. So, you know, that's why it's so hard to have these conversations, is because people just write it off like, well, that's not IBM, or that's not this. And they don't realize behind the scenes, there are these larger connections. So.
Yeah. And that's the challenge.
Yeah,
too,
and they are funded by Andreessen Horowitz.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
they are a main investor in Cello, and they get grants from
surprise.
Cello,
so, yeah. Right. Well, I said, like, did they not look it up? Like, the first thing, if I saw something odd that I wasn't familiar with, like in my industry, like, I would look up who these people are, or who's funding them, or like curious, right? Like, I would be curious if there's this new technology. But literally, and this is something I kind of touched on in the series I'm working on, is I feel like they have gamed this out like 10, 20 years out. And so each of these episodes is set up to usher in the next phase of the plot. And so, like, the crypto, the Bitcoin, the crassness, the corruption, all of that is meant to then fall away and then say, well, it's just a tool. We could use it for good. We could use it for the commons. And, like, it's not, the tool is neutral. This is a neutral tool. And look, those people, either they were misguided or they were corrupt or what have you, but we can use the tool in this way, like, here, follow me and I'll show you how we do it. And if you don't have a larger understanding of the sensor networks doing all of the data verification are ultimately a cybernetic military mind control game, like, you're going to miss it.
And by the way, I highly recommend, Allison's working on a new series. She's up to part 4. How many parts are there going to be?
It might be 15.
50?
I have like
50?
15, 1-5. I've got 14 written, and there's probably 2 more. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a long.
Really interesting.
It's kind of a long read, but there's a lot of information in there, and I highly recommend it.
Well, I would say too, like, it's interesting because I've gotten to know, there's like what's presented in the media and even in the alt media, and then what the real story is. And so when the FTX Alameda research stuff happened, like, I looked at Sam Bankman-Fried and I'm like, it's not him. Like, he's a kid. Like, no offense, but he didn't even have a master's degree. Like, these firms, like, to be an entry-level quant at these high-level firms, like, you have to be like a top-tier applied math PhD, right? So none of this stuff made sense unless it was always meant to fall apart. And I didn't realize his connection to the Center for Effective Altruism. And we can talk about this a little bit later on, but if you can scroll back up, Jason, to show that. So that is their logo for the Center for Effective Altruism. It's a heart, and it's contained within a light bulb. All right. And so I think a lot of what they're doing with cybernetics now is what they call bottom-up organizing, and it's fractal. So it's everything from like a bacterial cell to human beings as agents in a collective. And they're using electricity, like electromagnetic frequency, to catalyze and organize behavior into like this complex systems that come into like emergence as an organism. And so, like, when we think about Cello, when we think about these sensor networks, I think it's really important to understand that it is like an electro communication signaling that is being used to steer and direct individual units into some organized fashion. And the fact that a lot of the FTX people had this affiliation with the Center for Effective Altruism, which is they're based in Sam Bankman-Fried worked there for just 2 months, and it's on his LinkedIn. Like, who would work anywhere for 2 months and put it on your LinkedIn? I don't know. Maybe in the crypto space, 2 months is not such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
But shows I'm showing my age. But it's in Oxford, but it's highly networked in Silicon Valley too. Like, I think it's actually the 990 NGO registration is in Berkeley or something like that. But it's centered in a building with like the AI governance and Nick Bostrom's Future of Humanity Institute. And so it's charity situated within AI governance, big data analytics, and like forecasting of this quote unquote like long-termism of like, how do we navigate next gen, like the coming singularity, I think is what they're talking about. So nested within that, like Eric Drexler, who is like one of the fathers of the molecular engineering and nanotechnology, like, he's embedded in all of that stuff. Like, like, everybody should have been looking over there, like, what's going on with Eric Drexler and Nick Bostrom and like the woman, Drexler's original organization called the Foresight Institute is now run by this woman, Alison Duettmann, Duettmann. And so she's running it out of San Francisco, and like, she's Eric Drexler's sidekick, and she's pitching to Protocol Labs, like, all of these emerging technologies, all of them emerging. And I'm like, what is going on, people? Like, yeah, like, it wasn't Sam Bankman-Fried as the focus. It was all the stuff going on behind, and like, what is the intersection of all of this stuff? But in the name of charity, like, because his nickname was evidently the Bentham of crypto, right? And it is scientific management of charity, which is the cybernetics. But they're in it for the whole game. They don't want to just engineer people. They want to engineer people and the environment, which is why the natural capital asset natural asset class.
Yeah,
I don't
natural
know.
assets, natural capital. Yeah, don't
Yeah.
either one.
And the human
can
capital
say.
like interface, because they're at this point it's the whole gambit. Like the goal is to gamify the world from space. So anyway,
Yeah.
All right.
Well said.
Well, let's start this. Just let me know if
Oh,
when you want to stop, and I'll stop and we'll chat.
Thanks for having us. A little disclaimer on our side. Interspecies games the fuse between Curve Labs and Weave teams. So our presentation is going to be at hyperspeed. Little forgiveness for that. At Interspecies games, we think financializing or tokenizing nature is not sufficient enabler for sovereignty. On the contrary, this approach risks the new creation of algorithms of extraction. Thus, we think agency must be embedded in internet relationality of species and their environment. We propose playing into existence a new paradigm of a networked agency of interspecies context. Nature doesn't need our charity. We need more robust and convivial forms of engagement to create new relations of solidarity between humans and nature that would foster interspecies engagement and coordination towards the realization.
Okay.
So like, this is his pitch, and I like, Jason, do you have thoughts about some of the languaging here? Because I mean, it's interesting, like conviviality, right? Like he's posing this as not extractivist. Like this is the opposite of extractivism. Like what's coming is that we go and we participate in this game. Like we almost create it through the game.
And this argument for saying it's not extractivist is by like letting people be agents.
Yes. Sovereignty.
That's digital. Yeah, that's like digital identifiers and letting them.
Well, and then he's like,
I mean, it's absurd. It's letting them be it's even deeper extractivism.
Yeah, for sure. And he's like, nature doesn't need our charity, but it's. I mean, I'd agree with that statement, but that's, there's, yeah.
But it's market. Like this is all about like a market, and and this imagery is very interesting. I mean, it wasn't on the Medium article, like this particular, some of these visuals, but it does have this weird feeling of some of the like weird AI blended.
Yeah, I don't even understand what the meaning behind that is.
Well, I mean, I think that's a
seems
portal.
like the veil. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like behind the veil, like what would that be? Yeah. On the tarot cards.
Like, open the door of your mind.
Yeah. Symbolic of like the deep unconscious.
And it's almost like the pineal gland or whatever, like on the back, like the portal, right? Like they want direct access to that innermost knowing.
Which he has on his forehead.
I know, that's interesting, right? Oh my gosh. And then, I mean, clearly the butterflies are metamorphic. And I don't know that, I mean, some of those fronds, not all of them, but the one on the left looks a little bit like a ginkgo, like leaf a little bit.
Oh,
just
yeah.
that one.
Are there music notes in there? Or is that?
Is what?
I was trying to see if those were music notes coming on her cheeks. I don't know. Maybe it's.
Oh no! It kind of looked like it, but
I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely interesting imagery.
Well, and again, the words, like they know what we're gonna say. Like, oh no, we're not doing the extractivist kind. We're doing participatory, right? And I think that's for me, if we understand this as energetic signaling, like they need our consent to play, right? And to me, like they don't necessarily. We're not going to know all of the nature of the game when we pick up the tokens to play. And I feel like in some ways that's the crypto space, that there's an energetic hold on people who have crypto. It doesn't mean they're bad people, but like once they engage in the game of crypto, that their energetic field gets hooked into something bigger. Like there's like an energetic hold that comes with that. But that's not going to be everybody. Like not everybody's going to be participating in digital currency, at least at the first stage. So there's also the digital voting, which is something I haven't had a chance to go into, but that was another piece of my series, was looking at creating betting markets on having broad-based participation on voting. And what we'll see here later on in the clip, they talk about people making suggestions for resource allocation in the quote unquote park, which is really a DAO, a decentralized organization. People make a suggestion and then votes happen on whether or not to approve a proposal, which is, to me, it looks very similar to the Gitcoin structure, like the Gitcoin grants, the same kind of thing. And so this idea of participation, like it needs our consent. And then once we give our consent to it energetically, we're connected into the superorganism.
It's like consent and motivation, like wanting people, they need people to be excited and want to, it's like, oh yeah, we get to choose how to spend resources on the park, or collecting that all together to, things that will go off to places that you have no idea can't understand.
Well, and I would say, like, as we're listening to it, because some of it, what they're asking is for you to go and find things and then feed them back to the tree of life. Okay, like go get images, document the environment and bring it back to this tree of life, which is actually a DAO, which is a machine. It's not actually a tree. It's something else that they're calling a tree. And to me, this feels like within the ant computer phase is there's like scouting. So there are certain ants that go and then they scout out the environment and then they find resources and then they bring it back and then they tell the others. And so to me, this feels like an agent-based modeling of like scouting behaviors for a non-living thing, like for something that we've agreed. And then again, the peer pressure, like you said, it's not just a game, but it's a game probably played with people in community. And so that's even stronger. Like you even have a stronger connection from the peer pressure and like the self-reinforcement of doing it with others.
So have you watched the whole thing? Because I see that it's a hackathon. So that it's teams pitches and demos. Was this a winner? You know how that works, the hackathon, that's what ETH Denver is in part, is a hackathon. So they have all these people come in and they pitch, they code things and then they pitch an idea. So this is one of the groups that were pitching, or was this okay.
I mean, I'm not 100% sure like what the deployment was, but there was an article written about it. And so, but it's a useful use case, even conceptually as a white paper concept, because it draws together a lot of these ideas about money, voting, standing, community, nature.
Gotcha.
Yeah, which they're doing in all sorts of other projects too, not necessarily in this like ritualistic version, but pretty much the same thing with ecological assets and collective management.
But see, this is a story. Like the thing that I think that I'm realizing more and more, because I kept saying, they want our stories. There's a lot of emphasis on story, on culture, on art. Like you'll see later, part of the game is that when you collect a bug, you're supposed to write it a poem. Now that's kind of weird. Like there's something going on there with the machine learning that, like, I'm not against poetry. I love it. I don't think I would write a poem to a bug whose picture I just took on an app. Like there's some reason they're asking for a poem. Like they want something that is this human intuition, like fed into this thing. So I think the artwork, the drawing you into like you're a participant in fixing the problem. Like it so much of the like resistance space to me seems really focused on they're going to beat you down and make you eat bugs and I'm like, I'm not saying they're not going to do any of that, but like they would rather just invite you and have you do it because you want to.
Mm-hmm. Well, we were talking earlier about like the Chat GPT and all the AI art, and I was at a friend's house. Was it last? No, it wasn't last night. It was the other night. and he was real excited about the Chat GPT, and he was the art. And so he was like, oh, just say something, just say whatever comes off your head, and he was like, so he's like, you put into different things. And then the AI generates a piece of art based on that, and then there's like a feed of other people's work that's just like popping through a feed, and so you put it in, and then yours is added to the feed. So he's like, shoot, I hate that, then I have to scroll back and find mine or whatever. But like you were talking about, like you said something this morning about, like, you know, like it wants what's on our mind, and I was thinking about that in terms of that's what it was. It was just like, what comes to your mind? Say the first thing that comes to your mind. And actually in psychology, there's actually a whole therapy where they do that, like the word association. There's, you know, where they
like graphic profiles.
I say something and you just say whatever comes to your mind, and they can like psychoanalyze you based on this sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, imagine.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is, like, part of what I'm trying to come to terms with, and like, I don't really know what I'm talking about, so I'm just trying to kind of talk it out loud and see if I can make it make sense. But like, Drexler was like, one of his most recent projects was working on a language for intelligent machines. And, you know, what I've realized, because, you know, I'm here in Philly and with Penn, is that there's a lot of stuff about organizing information, right? Like Leo, like we've looked at like Garfield and the what is the Vannevar Bush, is it Memex? I can't remember, idea. And then this project Xanadu, Ted Nelson, and like Penn, I didn't fully comprehend that they had Rand evidently. So, you know, one of the first, like, I don't know what kind of computer, like ENIAC was among the first big computers in World War II. And von Neumann like advised on it, and it was actually built out at Penn and then later transferred to Aberdeen. So we have this weird computer history. And then during the Cold War, like in the 50s, Rand threw off like one of their high power computer things and gave it back to Penn. And it was used for a computing system, not just for engineering, but for psychology and linguistics. So Penn for a very long time had this like computational structural linguistics programs, and then like high level linguists, and, you know, I can't remember his name, was Zelig Harris. And then he taught a number of people, including Noam Chomsky and Ted Nelson of Xanadu. And I think Garfield might have like spent time at Penn. So there's this deep history of like, how do you organize like cognitive neuroscience? How do we think about things? How does language help us think about things? How do we communicate? And once we get to these high level computers that can like, and we get everything on blockchain, and it's across time and space in quantities that no human can fully comprehend because of the vast amounts of data, supposedly like AI is going to be able to sift through that and do sense making of that in ways that are not innate to human experience, because it's at such a vast scale that it's just not transferable. So on the one hand, if there are different machine learning algorithms out there, they have to talk to each other about like, well, what did you find? Well, I found this. What did you find? And what do we do with it? And then there is some weird way that like, once it has a concept that it's communicating, it's like, what do we do now? Maybe we should make some sensors do some things. And then how do they talk to the sensors? And what does that even look like? Because I think what they're trying to do is build a language outside of biology, like build a language, because Noam Chomsky's like frame was a universal grammar. And what he said was that like language is innate to humans and it's sort of part of our biology. But I feel like once we give it over to DAOs and blockchains, it will have its own language outside. And what does that look like? And you know, Reiser, when I was looking, you know, at World Brain, he's talking about music. Like maybe music is the global language. Could it be like an annotation? Could it be like these directed acyclic graphs? Could it be like, and I don't know, but I think it would look like something that's not anything we would understand as language. And that maybe this chat GPT, these ideas of having a personal advisor, is like a step down, right? Like you can't understand what the AI knows, but there's some intermediary that will like break out what the AI knows about and then bring it to you in a way that you can comprehend it in some way, or that is some way actionable. And then possibly the step down into the sensor networks that then change the world and manipulate us as programmable matter. So anyway, I was thinking music, I'm thinking pheromones, I'm also thinking art, because I feel like art, like we were just trying to deconstruct what the heck is up with that woman's face. Like, what is that saying? And so like, I don't know. I was also thinking like
Wait, yeah.
Chinese, like it conveys a lot more than just a word or a sentence.
So let me, if I could try to, or restate, or if I think I understand what you're trying to say. Basically, what the language that, with the focus on like computational linguistics and art and psychology and all these other different things that you wouldn't necessarily associate with like intense computing, or people wouldn't go there first, could be in part of the attempt to help essentially like catalyze how AI algorithms and computer systems can communicate when they're dealing with these like, unfathomable amounts of data and like computation on them. Yeah, that makes.
I feel like some of it maybe even like the synthetic telepathy, like like, I got this book by John Lilly. Lilly was also at Penn. Like he started at Penn and then he went over to the NIMH. But he was the one who was doing all the ketamine and the isolation chambers and communing with other energetic intelligences. But later, anyway, he had many near-death experiences, and they said, "Okay, this is your last time." And then he went and like worked with dolphins.
Oh, yeah.
But it was like it was like the dolphin language, right? And so I feel like a lot of this idea, this quest for like psychical communication beyond language, isn't just like, hey, Leo, I'd love to like talk to you, but I don't want a phone, in Vermont while I'm sitting here. But it's actually how would we interface with a high level, like something that thinks in structurally different ways than we're prepared to think within our biology.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I think that's what they're trying to figure out. Like, but I don't know what it looks like. Does it look like art? Does it look like a composition? Does it seem like a pheromone? It's like a signal that communicates a richness of a concept beyond what we can like process.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I feel like you see some of that in blockchain and like node operators, and like when people are running nodes that comprise the network, they're like really, and you can see it, and you have like streams of information and different things going on. It's like you're kind of interfacing with the movements and the energy of that blockchain as it changes and responds and transactions, or if something weird happens. That's or bad weird. Or some
That's
bugs
like
and stuff.
Show. What was that
What TV show?
That TV show that Steffers, like I was like, that's set in the office, and they're the one that's at Bell Labs, like the headquarters in what I've totally like
separation or no, it was like
where your brain severance. Yeah, but like they're put in a thing, and they're the numbers, and they said you'll find it. It'll be scary. The numbers will be scary. Just look, and like she looks for like weeks, and she doesn't see anything, and it's just numbers, and they're like, you'll find it. It'll be the scary number. And then one day she's like, oh, there it is. Like, but like you can't, like, you're looking over show, you don't look that those numbers look scary, but like there's like an intuitiveness about that. That's interesting to think. So, I mean, and again, like there's how do we interface with it? And then how does it interface like different intelligences and then within the sensors? And then the language, because some of it, like I'm thinking of the concentration on the biodiversity credits, like the rainforests were central to like complexity theory. Like when John Holland developed genetic algorithms, like his core thing was saying like rainforests are this amazing complex system because it's due to the amount of rain, the soil is actually weirdly diminished of minerals. And so it finds different ways through like cupping of leaves and water management and like the little things that live in the pools of the water in the trees to recycle nutrients in non-traditional ways than like you would like, a Lancaster County farm meadow or something. It functions differently in very complicated ways. And so like, imagine they've got their sensor networks and they're training up a machine intelligence. Like you would want something with as much richness of data as possible. I would think if your aim is to have the most complex language, you would go to the place that was the most complicated, like in terms of life
Totally.
forms. So, like, and I don't know how it all goes together yet, but I'm just like finding these logical parts. Like if it's, and then how would the sensors then enact the execution function onto the environment based on the AI? And like, would we be anywhere in the loop, or are humans like out of the loop? Like, would we be like, you know, here's a step down, here's choice A, B, or C for the sensor network based on the AI says you should do this to your farm field. And then you
Yeah.
choose A, B, or C, or does like, are you just like, you know,
Yeah, I
you're
think
just
it's
like doing other like park rituals and it's doing the stuff to the environment.
I think for now, a lot of it, especially maybe a little bit unlike the mass industrial agriculture, I bet a lot of it would be doing it itself.
The
Like
drones.
they have autonomous tractors and, you know, all these things that, you know, they're probably a lot closer to fuller automation. But as far as like the conservation or like the food forest of the collectivo and stuff, I think it would be a lot more like the ABC. You know, they get all this information. Here are the pathways you have to go in order to stay within the standards of maintaining wellness in the forest and that sort of thing. But then, I think what I would want to do for like thinking about what you're talking about, I would need to like, I guess, like, is it with the machine communication, it's still like it's still based in binary mathematics, right? For now, like, is that I would want to like learn a bit more about how like how information is sent from satellites and to other sensors and stuff, and like those mechanics in order to get more of a grasp on how that sort of a more essentially like mechanical thought forms would be constructed, and then seeing how they would want to use how to interface us with that essentially.
Well, like I was looking at two papers, and again, I don't claim to understand, like I don't do really high level math, but I think I can think sort of in broader strokes and like how it like would need to work. And then, but like, so one of them was like the large pheromone ant project. This was like 2006. And they were looking at like a more centered intelligence versus distributed. And it was nodes, and that the ants would go to the nodes and then they would sample what was the information at the node. And then they would sync their data if they had new data. And then it was like a sampling behavior so that like quickly all of the data went to all of the nodes. And so like, again, what does that look like in terms of like sampled, like, is it just sequences of numbers? And then the other piece was weighting some of these ant foraging behaviors among the nodes with, I guess, like the pheromone and the stigmergy, so that it was almost like depositing information. It was like making music. Now my friend in the Netherlands said this, Alison, that's not music, that's data. Like it's different, like MIDI versus, I don't really understand all that piece. Like it's not actually music, but they were interpreting like the pathway as a data signal, which is interesting now that I think about it, because way back in the day when I was still at Bartram's Garden, like in 2013, we had people come into the garden and do this data garden where they were trying to like collect the frequencies of plants and make them into music, like digital music. Yeah. Like with sensor networks. And it was like, you know, again, one of these fringe art things, which it seems like there's a whole lot of stuff buried in these fringe art things. Like when you show up, you're like, 10 years later, that's what that was about. But it's like almost like mixing like sensory information. Like how do you sense data? Like how do you make it sensible? So anyway, we should probably keep going with the video. But anyway, these are the things that I'm mind, because I think about it. I'm like, why are they doing biodiversity? Like we know it's not just because they want to save the planet. There's something there that they want. Like they want that data of the because of maybe its complexity.
Yeah. Okay.
So. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's literally like with the Life Watch, Eric and the Naturalis, and like what's going on in the Netherlands. Arise? Yeah, sorry, the Arise project, where they're trying to map all multicellular organisms in the Netherlands, and then in a what they call BioCloud, which is basically getting all the, all of the types of data that they can get from like radar, the cameras, or sound, like mating call or whatever, and then making that machine computable. And then I think it's the Lumi supercomputer that they're using.
Oh,
So
right,
it's
the one
all
in
being
Barcelona.
well, that's a different one, but that's
Different.
Matika Solutions. Yeah, there's another supercomputer that's
They
coming
all housed in
online.
cathedrals or something.
Yeah, yeah, that one's that's a crazy image, but yeah. So I mean, it's kind of
Like you think about
it's just like that. It's making all the complexity computer, like, putting it straight into the AI in order to.
Like, and you don't have to drill it into your brain, but like we lived for 3 years under the rule of data dashboards, right? So that kind of is a language, right? Like that was a language of big data. Like someone took a data set and they said, this is the story we're going to tell with this data, and it tells this story. And thus the entire world has to align to the story that we're telling with the data this way. And so like a lot of the infographics, the data, like that, it feels to me like that's the beginnings of the interface of how we convey, and like why there's such a push for data analysts, because actually they'll be the linguists of the AI. Like that's what the data analyst will be. It will be a language, and then it will be a language that tells a story, right? And so they want to invite us into the story that they're telling with their data, even though that we know that there's probably, in most cases, multiples, if not dozens of different stories you could tell with the same data. But with the solidity of it, they'll say, this is fact. You can't contest this data. It's our story. You have to be in it,
Right.
Yeah, definitely a narrowing down to, okay, I'll play some more of this.
Of a not only human regenerative economy. How to activate a new we, a new collective consciousness that allows us to summon and perpetuate an interspecies agency. We want to move from an atomized understanding of charity as the modus operandi for impact towards a relational one where transformation happens at the edges, unleashing viral dynamics. Our approach draws on the theory of social choice as opposed to classical game theory.
Like, I wish I had this written down because there's a lot packed into this little thing. Like, so he's saying social choice theory. So again, that's the decision theory. And he's also talking about emergence, not in the nodes, but at the edges. And so to me, that feels like that sort of, again, at the border of the order and chaos, that emergence is what he's talking about.
When the whole thing we were going into with the Voronoi, it was all about, lining up where those edges are and mapping that out. Like the edges were really important.
Yeah. And even like some of the wording, like summons, like we're going to summons the thing, like, okay.
From node-oriented systems to edge-oriented systems, as we try to articulate peer influence as a multi-species paradigm. We seek to reformulate human nature, false dichotomy.
Like the peer influence, I think, like, and that's the cybernetics in some ways, like, because they want, and I think to me, this feels somewhat like the soul-bound tokens, like the metadata tags, and even like they want to make everything machine readable so that it's not just you individually, it's you as a collective. That is where the more interesting data, like you as a collective of people, you as a human with agent within a ecosystem of many other beings. And it's that pressure back and forth.
Yeah, like making a multi-species. What he said, what was the exact phrasing? Peer, like multi-species peer relationship, like making the other species agents in the system, and then mapping computationally our relationships with them as a part of, like you said, that.
Yeah.
We also think about the concept of the reputation economy. The idea, like you're all about it's all about your reputation within the community, within the system, and how that's going to be tokenized. But that's the whole peer thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's a lot about the voting too. Like, and are you a good member in good standing? And I would say, Leo, looking back at the Ledgard articles, about the animal wallets, like
Yeah.
on the surface, if people didn't have this background of like this new paradigm of being in the world as a game with peer-based, like non-human living forms all being on blockchain, that just seems really far out, right? Even for me, knowing a lot of it, when I read it, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Really? Giraffes? Like a wallet? Like, what are they to do with a wallet? But if everything is are fungi gonna have a wallet? Are they gonna and for how
Yeah, they
much of
will,
it?
because
The fruiting body will have a wallet, and then the underground part will have a wallet, or they all get the same wallet? Where do you draw a boundary of like life?
yeah, well, I mean, that's like with all of it. It's like the innate psychosis of it is that like drawing. I mean, just the beginning of it, drawing hexagons to make the game board.
Arbitrary,
Not,
yeah.
Yeah, it's all arbitrary. So it's all arbitrary, and then they'll make arbitrary decisions that don't work out, and then they'll change them into something that they can argue is more reflective of what it should be, and then they just continue that process, which is like what they do with the carbon credits. Oh, it's bad. They're bad carbon credits, so we need better carbon credits. This do this.
Yeah.
The same.
I don't know how you guys, I like some of his stuff, but whatever. Alan Watt, the Buddhist guy, I had a clip where he was talking about, like the people that map things out are the people that are more concerned about the representation than they are like the actual reality. And he was just pointing out how like the city of San Francisco, how they laid out the streets. And he's like, you have these, these hills, and you have these really dangerous, they have the roads going straight up the street because they looked at a map, they looked at a flat map, and then they just mapped it out in this grid form, which was completely disconnected from the actual landscape. So I was just thinking about that in terms of the gridding of the hexagon, the hexagonal maps. But that goes back. I mean, the mapping of Africa, or where, you name it, where there's not really any consideration of the people that are there, or the culture, or whatever. But it's a continuation of that kind of mentality. Although they're going to refine it. They're going to make it more scientifically and mathematically accurate, supposedly.
Well, and I think the thing of agency and sovereignty is so important, like this sovereign nature, because like I felt bad about all of like the sovereignty discussion from the beginning of the lockdowns. Like, I was, me, Jason, I was pushing back on John Bush and Derek, like from the beginning on their sovereignty talk, on their freedom cell talk, like centering all of that. And like, I didn't know, really until maybe a year ago about the agents, like about the modeling, like the language. I didn't have that language to understand why the sovereign thing, but I'm like, you don't want to be the contents of a data wallet. Like that's not, I don't think like most people who imagine that they're part of some sort of alternative outside the main, like would want to self-identify as the contents of their digital wallet with their soul-bound tokens. But and the fact that they would apply that, not just like, again, they're saying sovereign nature, that they would apply a wallet, like that your essence is contained within a wallet, whether you're a flatworm, or you're a goldfish, or you're, a kitten or a person. Like everybody's got a wallet, and that's what you are, because to the AI, that's all you can be. Like there's not. And then increasingly our sovereignty, even though we think of ourselves as individual, they're going to start to fall into like, there's going to be buckets. There's going to be like, oh, you're pretty much like this. We'll just bucket you with that. And like, yeah, you might have some outlier views, but we'll just set that aside for now. And you're in this bucket, and you're in that bucket. And and because even the biggest machine, like they're not going to deal with the complexity of each people as a unique item. Like we're going to be these archetypes, and because that's how we're going to be managed in the game. And to think about applying that to like just the desecration of nature. Like, and to even think you could try, like, no offense, like nature is subsumed within blockchain. Like now what, like nature is reportable to blockchain is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, totally.
Through platforms leveraging automated logic, and game mechanics facilitating engagement around resource accumulation and collective allocation.
Okay, so game dynamics, automated logic, and resource allocation. Like those are all really important concepts.
Collective.
Like I really feel like I need to type that down. Yeah.
Collective allocation.
Automated logic. We do not want to live in the world of automated logic.
Absolutely not.
Use our game a little bit. The main game mechanic rests around the idea of the tree of life, an embodiment of the spirit of the park. In this context, the Volkspark Friedrich sign, which coordinates the narratives and user flows around the park.
Coordinates the narratives and the user flows. Can I just say that? Coordinates the narratives and the user flows in the park. Now, as best I can tell, like it's hard to say. Now, this isn't a particular park. This is not like Bartram's Garden in Fairmount Park. I think that this park and the Tree of Life is actually a DAO. And I think when they're saying go take pictures of bugs, they're not in like somewhere in Berlin per se, even though this guy says come to my neighborhood and take pictures. I think the concept is more broad than any particular park, but they're controlling the narrative and the user interface.
I'm trying to read some of these words. It's almost like, like the metal bands where you can't read the writing.
Game of Oracles and Game of Sigils and the Tree of Life.
Yeah.
And
Eric?
Enric, and I can't see.
I can't read. Yeah,
Pascal, maybe? I don't know.
Okay.
Objectives: to become self-aware through oracular inputs and to enrich its relations with its community. The Tree of Life.
Okay, wait a minute. Can we just roll that back a tiny bit? Because I think what it just says there is that this Tree of Life wants to become alive with our oracular inputs.
Okay.
Context the Volkspark Friedrich sign, which coordinates the narratives and user flows around the park. The tree has two main objectives: to become self-aware through oracular inputs and to enrich its relations with its community. The Tree of...
Did you hear that?
Yeah. The tree. It has two objectives.
To become self-aware.
I'm just wondering how he knows this. If how does he know what the Tree of Life wants?
He engineered it as a token.
They make it, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a big deal. He kind of scoops over that pretty quick, but like to become self-aware based on our oracular inputs.
Yeah.
And what was the second one? This self-aware through our oracular inputs and then
user flows around the park. The tree has two main objectives: to become self-aware through oracular inputs and to enrich its relations with its community.
Enrich its relations with its community.
Yeah, how does that feel?
Yeah. Poor Tree of Life. It's all out there alone. Doesn't have very enriched relations with its community. Isn't self-aware. That's a poor thing.
Yeah, based on what they're doing with
agents.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, based on what they're doing at Collectivo and stuff, it's basically, you can substitute Tree of Life for like Geo NFT and food forest, defined parcel sort of thing that is like its inputs that's the data that's from human surveys, that's from satellites, that's from everything that is sensing it, that's its self-awareness is that data generated, and then its relationships is basically the services, the ecosystem services that are the monetized and like the energy propelling the whole thing.
Well, I'm also thinking about
basically exactly.
Yeah. Well, I was also thinking about oracles. Like, so you could replace bug with whatever it is you want, or replace any of this, replace Tree of Life. But like because I've always been trying to think about like they need, so the whole oracle thing, they Chainlink or whomever, they want a bunch of, people or, even computers or whatever, but to do verification on, is this true? Is X, Y, or Z true or not? And so you could send, through these games, you can send people out for tokens to verify all sorts of different things. You know what I mean? And then if they get enough verifications, then they'll say, oh, well, we've met the threshold. Therefore we can because that's what it's all about. Like they have to measure everything that they're doing, whatever their impact programs are, right?
And then they have a whole badge system too for, if you have, it's like, oh, you're a certified food forest expert, and then you could have certain like governance abilities on making decisions or inputting data, and that feeds back into the ecological state. And they have these whole series of badges for the various different people involved in the system that control the permissions and governance and stuff.
The hall monitor.
Yeah.
Because I guess the thing is, they can't fully automate all of the data collection that they want.
Right.
They can get a certain amount from the satellites or a certain amount from the drones, but we aren't covered with sensors yet. Not everything is available. The breadth of what they want. So it feels like even now, within AI, they say, well, a lot of things that they might allude to that being AI are actually humans behind the scenes, facilitating data tagging or various things that make these algorithms work. But the algorithms aren't prepared yet to do all of these things. It actually is a human teaming. And so that's the other part about the complex system is early on, I saw a talk by this woman, Amy Cruz, I think, who used to be with DARPA. And she was talking a lot about hybrids, she called them centaurs, that this phase would be human machine hybrids. And that on the one hand, they're trying to frame this chat GPT as your, thought prosthetic or your personal assistant. So that's a kind of hybrid. But I feel this game is also another hybrid. If you choose to play the game, then you are part of a collective organism that is feeding the tree this information. And this particular tree is actually a machine. And we're feeding the machine with data translated through machine, individual communication devices. So that is another kind of global hybrid structure. And that, so when we say cyborgs, it conjures up a certain vision, but I don't think that term really gets at the nature of a hybrid teaming life that is what they're after.
I feel one example, just, say you have a farm, food forest, and they collect fruit that they're going to sell. And as a part of the management agreements for managing that parcel in the system, they'd be weighing the food. We collected this amount of fruit, and that'd be on a scale. And that scale, that's digital information. That's this sensing that would be inputted back into. It's the forest produced this amount of fruit. And you wouldn't think of that as being a cyborg, but that's what it is. It's the same.
It's interesting because the garden used to do that. We have an urban farm, and we have a youth program, right? A summer, that they work with the kids and teach them about it. And it's a great program. But again, when we do our end of the year fundraisers, we're always and this farm produced X amount, and I don't know how actually totally accurate it was, but X amount of food for the community. A lot of it was given out, either low cost to low income communities. So that's the productivity, and it's not yet nuanced enough to be tucked into a DAO. But it could easily be that could be a coordinated superorganism. Yeah. At some point.
Yeah, exactly. I feel that's a good way of showing how it's stuff that, people have been weighing the food that they've grown for a very long time. It's not some weird new thing that they're making you do or something, but it's just, suddenly the scale records it so you can keep your bookkeeping or whatever. And then there you go. You're deeply in this.
Well, I just was thinking remember the original personal assistants. Do you remember this one?
I always
vaguely
turn that off.
That was back when Windows, the old school Windows, they had this little guy that would pop up. That was your Windows.
Right.
Oh, gosh.
Stupid.
I think Windows XP was the earliest.
No, they had.
Well, and I would say,
that's not
look
the
at
earliest.
the images
Windows
there.
95.
But that I had used.
Oh yeah, gotcha. The image,
one
yeah, it's like tarot
The
cards
one
or
on
something.
the right,
Mhm.
like it's mushrooms. Like it's a tiny person in giant mushrooms, and then like there's a big
Oh.
mouth sticking out.
Yeah, I see a mouth. Yeah,
So
with the tongue sticking out.
like yeah,
Huh.
and I mean I'm just gonna say like so much of the Stealing Fire book, it's definitely all about like, well, on the one hand like altered states of consciousness, but on the other hand like fungal networks. It's like a lot about, or maybe it's all connected. Ultimately, I don't know.
Yeah, I have some clips here of Jamie Wheel. We may or may not get to him, but well, let's continue on.
See, with an associated Ethereum address owned by a Gnosis safe. The safe is the owner of a spectralized, fractionalized NFT, thus is the beneficiary for the majority of the staked tokens. These tokens enable both access for governance, for the resources, and also provide incentives for incentivizing behavior of its community, both in terms of facilitating learning and also the betterment of the public space.
I will tell
Do
you
we pause
about.
there?
Yep.
Okay. So I would be interested if you guys could just say a little bit about like incentives tokens versus governance tokens, because I feel like that's a core concept of like how the money and the democracy piece are going to like if not merge exactly that, but they're both running on this Web3 apparatus that most people who are like, unless they're actively involved in governing a DAO, like they don't know anything about like the governance tokens.
Yeah. Well, I see incentive
Yeah.
tokens, governance tokens. It's the same thing, right? I mean, it's it's good that's
Usually,
governance, right?
yeah, not necessarily, but usually they often are. The governance token's basically just like a token that would give you rights to vote
On like
in
the DAO
to make
yeah.
decisions on
Gotcha.
how the DAO's money is spent, and then
The
there could be
token, yeah.
there could be incentives that are paid in the form of the governance token,
Right.
but sometimes that could be a different token. A big part of like, because so in like Web3 and DeFi and stuff, all these tokens that are being traded are pretty much they're all traded on dexes, and there's like certain financial mechanisms that make the markets in a way that you like lock up the token into that application and then earn like both trading fees and oftentimes like an incentivized yield. So like besides just the trading fees for like putting your liquidity and your token in to make the market, there'll be some like external incentive to do that, which is oftentimes the governance token, but could be another, could be like DAI or some other token.
Is that kind of like Giveth? Is Giveth like part of it? Like if you lock in more, you get more say. I'm trying to remember how Giveth works.
That's slightly different, but similar. I think that's what's called conviction voting. Like if you lock up a token for a longer amount of time, you get more voting power like in that organization. But what I just talked about would generally be called like yield farming.
Okay.
But that's like a whole
thing. Okay. Well, so I just did a quick edit just to like shorten this a little bit, but this is still part of the same proposal. And this guy is like presenting some of the more particulars about how the mechanics work.
The heart of our tree. So basically how it works. We have ERC20 and ERC721 tokens on the network. And based on the result of the games, based on the result on some actions that you've done in the park, you've cleaned the park beat, for example, you've played a game and you won. You get ERC20 tokens and you can use them to manage your park. So, for example, here you can see a list of proposals off-chain. So that's a snapshot, which is like off-chain voting provider basically for us. So you can generate new proposals. So like this. You just click new proposal and you can fill in your proposal, voting parameters. I won't just fill in because time is really running fast here. So yeah, for example, it's something like this. You generate question. For example, you have some hounds who have helped to manage like the park a lot, and you want to send some amount of tokens to him. And what we basically have here is some kind of a plutocracy. Let's say it right. So the more tokens you have, the more value you brought into the park, the more tokens you have, the more power you have in the voting on the park decisions. So yeah, you can vote here, and I will just show you an example of past voting. So yeah, that's like general examples of different voting. So yeah, so for example, you're just passing the vote, and after the vote has passed, it goes into the reality application when you should approve it. And after the vote has been approved, it can do anything. So for example, we have a general pool and on Gnosis Safe, and you can send some tokens from Gnosis Safe to pay to musicians that will come to your park and play. You can send some money to clean the park. So you can use your game and bring something new to the infrastructure.
We actually implemented one example of one of these.
Okay, so I just want to sort of frame what he was saying. So at the beginning, he said something about you can earn tokens to like by playing a game and like winning a game. And I can't remember if this was in the bit of the clip, but at one point he said like the people who have more tokens like have more say, right? So if you're more invested, you get, you know, a weighted vote. But this entire premise, now we understand that this isn't probably a real park in a real place. This is a DAO. But if it were actually a park with real musicians playing, like not in Decentraland or whatever, like this were actually a physical park within a physical place, like all of this is understood as like total privatization. Like if you incorporate a park that maybe was formerly a public park as a DAO, and then you're all voting, like everything becomes a market. And then your participation in terms of your proposals, how you vote on the proposals, those are all signals. And in my opinion, like unless it's said otherwise, I feel like it's signals that are making patterns that are reflecting back like who you are on your own digital identity, like for this machine learning. Like, are you somebody who's the one who's always making proposals? Are you somebody who never makes them? Or like, how are you perceived in the collective? Because it's going to be framed as radical participation. Like, look, it's open to everybody, but they're going to use your participation, the data attached to it, and the tokens, because this is all tokens. You're not like sitting in a meeting in person saying like, hey, like I think we should have a summer music conference, like, you know, whatever event, like let's raise some money to have some musicians and we'll do it. It's all like clearly in nodes and blocks and like connected. And when I saw that, to me, it struck me like everything I've seen with the Gitcoin grants is that, and you know, in that case, like that's a little bit different because they've got the, what is the voting? It's conviction voting. Is that the conviction voting? They've got these matching grants. So they're incentivized to like have the largest number of small amounts of grants that are then matched by this like billionaire blockchain money. But they really want the broadest number of participation because they want the data and they want the interconnectedness, because they've said like, we want to know the peers. Right. We want to know like how you fit into the group. So, you know, again, you're arguing down the primrose path and you're like, well, this doesn't seem so bad. Look, we all have a say in how we govern the park. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. We turned the park into a what? A machine? Like, we didn't realize that was like, that there were other options than turning the park into a DAO, but we just did that. Like, and like, look, how did that even happen? So anyway.
Well, just the whole idea of the tokenized voting, you're taking two distinct things, markets and then like a democracy or something that's democratic, that I would argue are kind of incompatible. They're not, you know, to have a health, you know, to have something that's democratically healthy, you can't introduce a market into it. To me, that's totally insane.
It's the American way, Jason.
Yeah. Well, I know I mean, yeah, not even getting into the fraud that we've been experiencing for, you know, hundreds of years.
I mean, from what I've seen, I feel like it's pretty much like a shareholder model is what a lot of this stuff is. It's pretty much, you have tokens, you have shares that allows you to make proposals to change it, and then there is a lot of the stuff, like you said, with wanting to like know how you vote and how you relate to votes and other people's proposals and all that, and like mapping those influence networks with each other. And I think for some of these like kind of piloty projects, they probably don't have a lot of that right there. But for something like MakerDAO or other big DAOs with money, I'm sure there's a lot of analysis on how different voters vote and relate to each other and communicate on online platforms and stuff. But I'd say pretty much like over like organizationally, it's very much like a shareholder. It's pretty much like it's a digital version of corporate government, like organizational management.
Well, maybe when we get done with this piece, if we could, I don't know that I actually sent you the link recently, but like the Merkle paper about the DAO democracy, like because that's sort of a core piece of what I'm trying to explore a little bit. And I'm not saying that I'm doing it super effectively because I'm still struggling with it myself. But this idea of Futarchy, which is something that like initially I think Sebs had brought up, and then Robin Hanson, and creating markets in outcomes around public policy, and then doing speculation around the voting. Because I feel like in some ways, I agree with like what you said for now, but I can see that if we do move into we've got to totally remake democracy for technology, that it's kind of like when I try to explain pay for success finance to people and they're like, I don't know how you make money on poor people. That seems counterintuitive. And I was like, well, it's not actually, it's about gambling, but they're gambling on the outcomes of a game. And so you actually need the pay for success to create the game. Because if there isn't any game, you can't have the gambling. The big money is in the gambling. It's not in the first market. It's in the secondary market. And so I feel like in some of this thing with like the betting on democracy, like they have to move us into a new framework to enable like the new markets that they want to have, like gambling on public policy outcomes, which is crazy to even think that that's a thing that they would do. But it seems clearly like when you look at the Merkle paper and he says like, oh, by the way, I'd like to acknowledge like the people who helped me think through this paper, and it's Buterin and it's Freitas and it's Hoskinson and Swan, like all of these key players. It's not like he's just sitting in a little office by himself in Oxford, like churning this paper out. Like there's some legs behind it that they want to make this DAO democracy happen. And I don't think it's to make better democracy. I think it's to make better signals, like more granular signals, and then to create the betting pools, and then to like enhance like the decision theory around the AI. I think they need a better graphic designer for the interface of their game.
What, you don't think? Yeah, that's not attractive.
I don't know. Like, it looks like something I would do, which is not good.
Yeah. Me too. But yeah, no, I think what you were saying, like, I put it. I almost think of that stuff like the Futarchy, the prediction markets, like mixed in with voting and the liquid democracy and all those different things. Yeah, I mean, it's a part of like the DAO frameworks and wanting to, I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, it's the cybernetics.
It's something. Yes, the cybernetics.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I'm not saying it's tomorrow. Like, I mean, it might not even be before I'm dead, or like it might be 15 years from now. Like but they have to position. Like they have to like, and that's why I was particularly interested in like Vermont and the conversation about like, to me, like you need to situate the story in a compelling backdrop, right? That would be appealing to sort of a populist framework, but not too extreme, right? Like not too, and to me, like in a place that is economically, distressed enough that you could roll in something without a huge amount of resistance and like, you know, having people pour outside money in to stop it. And like the whole town hall meeting, like if they are able to successfully co-opt this idea of like a small town, you know, America town hall meeting into like a liquid democracy, you know, whatever conviction voting model, and then start to bring it to scale. I mean, to me that, and again, the media would chime in and say, "Oh my gosh, thank goodness that we've come to our senses with some bipartisan, like sane way of coming to consensus around these big issues. Look, we don't have to hate each other. We can just like run it through the app, right? And look how much better life is now that we're running it through the app." And it's so hard to find a different positionality because I don't want toxic opposition. Like I don't want toxic polarization either. But like until there's some alternate narrative, like I see this one just coming, and it's literally to feed an anti-life system, and it's very hard to sit. People are like, well, so what's your proposal? And I don't have it yet, because it actually, if it were authentic, we would be talking about it together, you know, as like among our neighbors, not, you know, just.
Well, you know, I've heard the what's your solution come from a lot of people that are actively promoting, you know, blockchain technologies. And so my first answer would be, it's not that. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that thing. I mean, I know what it is, but I know it's not that. So that's actually is a step in the right direction to say, no, this is not something that we want. Now we can have a conversation about what we want or whatever. And we can get into the game B thing too at some point. But like, that's a lot of that whole thing about that conversation.
Right, the next thing. And so it's interesting, underneath you see there on the app, it says Pines and Electronics. So I'm not sure, like, why would they call it Pines? But
well, the other thing is the evergreen. The evergreen thing has come up recently.
It keeps coming up, the evergreen deal, like that. I mean,
which
did you remember that? Like Charles, right? Like, and what's wonderful about this evergreen deal is that it is fully extensible. You know, like the Ethiopia clip. And I'm like, that whole thing is just so staged. Like it just like it just rubs me the wrong way. But I'm going to use that actually when I go present to these women in New York, like in a couple weeks, because it just it's like right out of the guy's mouth what their plan is, right? Mm-hmm. But, yeah.
Do you want to watch more of this? Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, this finishes up. Like this is, it was mostly that beginning part. Like I almost feel like I want to transcribe exactly what he says, because almost every other word is very, very loaded.
There's a lot of language in there that's
interspecies games. This is called a game of oracles, and it's a specific instantiation called King of Bugs. So a bit of context. We were describing some type of autonomous system called the Tree of Life. The current best paradigm for instantiating a system that has, we would call it wisdom, self-consciousness, agency. The current best paradigm is called machine learning. Machine learning requires an amazing amount of high quality data. So wouldn't it be cool if there was a way to get data into the system without making people work for it? Data that is really, really difficult to get. This is sort of the tricky thinking of the Tree of Life. It's a super clever, system. So the Tree of Life is going to invite you to play a virally dynamic game. It is a live web app. You can use the QR code on your phone, and it'll work a lot better than I will demonstrate on my screen, because it's designed for a phone. So let's just play. So this is the first screen. No, this is not the first screen. This is the first screen. So this is called the Game of Oracles, and this is a landing page for
so it's the
Oribos or whatever,
that snake thing.
I was say that we were just talking about that language. You know, like the snake, but it was almost like there's things coming off of it, like the arrival language, the alien language.
Yeah, it does look like the arrival. Like that was in my last post. And it does. If you imagined it, was all black, like the edges.
Yeah. Anyway, I noticed that.
The Game of Oracles, and this is a landing page for many different types of games. Again, one instantiation we have made is called King of Bugs. How do you play King of Bugs? So you're in the park, you've got your phone, you're running around, you're looking for cool insects. Your objective is to find the coolest insect. Like, haven't you ever thought about this in a park? Where is the coolest insect right now? What does it look like? Maybe you guys have this problem, I don't know. Let's take a look. So we're going to capture a picture.
I just want to say, like,
so on your phone,
I mean, because I would walk, Bartram's garden a lot. It's not easy to take pictures of insects. Like, they're often, especially like pollinators, they're moving. Like, phones are not really equipped to like do that. Like, you're gonna be so distracted, and like, unless you're in some really exotic place, like it's like ants and roly-polies, or like some worms, or maybe some butterflies, cabbage moths. Like, it's not like later on he shows
tomato hornworms are pretty cool.
Yeah, they are pretty cool. Yeah, that's true. But like, I don't know. Like, do you think
they're hard
Rise
to find? Yeah. Well, yeah, Rise has like a whole crazy box thing, and like they have different camera systems for attracting insects. They don't try to, from what I've seen, they're not trying to like go out and find them. It's like they have to attract them into like a box in order to get like a detailed picture.
Oh, wow. The poor bugs, they're like they're being hunted down. It's like E.O. Wilson and his like butterfly net, right? Like, he would totally have won this game. Okay, sorry.
No worries.
This is already integrated with your camera. So in data science, I want to get high quality data. So here we can actually put a region mask on top of the image. We're gonna enter the image. We're gonna submit it to the Tree of Life.
That's a weird circle thing again.
Mr. Squishy. And I'm gonna compose a poem to it.
I'm gonna compose a poem.
So I had a lot of fun. I was making poems for all these bugs in the database.
Why are you making poems in the database? That's what I want to know. Like, that's strange. I mean, I'm not against poetry, but like, why are we feeding it to machine learning?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the mobile app. We're currently in mobile app world. We're not connected to the blockchain necessarily. So I'm going to switch now to the desktop app. With the desktop app, you should certify. This is the connection between blockchain identity and simple authentication. We'd sign in with MetaMask. We would certify our submissions. We sign them and say, yeah, this is mine. I own this in the blockchain. And we can take a look at the leaderboard. These are the current top bugs. Cool. How does a bug become the top coolest bug? The king of bugs. Let's go back and yeah, that's right. We built Tinder for insects.
Well, I was thinking too about like the face is Mark Zuckerberg's hot or not? Facebook early iteration of like they're gonna is this bug hot or not?
But see, the thing is, like, what if this mechanism is what they're going to use for voting? Like, what if all of a sudden you have 300 votes a day? Like, yes, no, yes. I mean, like, is that like you swipe for your thing and then the AI is doing it for you? Because I don't think this is really about bugs. I mean, I think
right.
Thing is, like, they're not asking you to identify the bug before you put it in. No, the AI is going to look at the bug and, like, with its machine vision, somehow sort it out. It didn't really. He didn't say you needed to know anything about the bugs or their habitat or the time of day or the whatever. I mean, I'm sure there's some metadata that comes with the photo, but
well, even the bottom there's arrows. Like there's a little guy puking, and then there's a heart.
Yeah, well, there's like love it, hate it, or whatever. But like, again, I think there's something going on here besides the bug game. Like there's some larger,
I agree,
like structure behind, like they're imagining a future where there's so many decisions that have to be made that you have to do it quickly. And it's almost like, Jason, like, quick, tell me what's on your mind, like say 5 words. Like they're trying to get at something that's more inner, like like without even thinking, like a subconscious frame, I think. In this voting, it's like a subliminal. There's something. Anyway.
Park. So we can swipe left and right. Love it. Don't like him. Cool. That's the game. So guys, you can jump on to the game. I want to play this game. We built it. We want to play it. My office is in Tiergarten. I'm going to send an invite. I want people running around. I'll be there playing with it. So in a couple of weeks. Yeah, let's make it happen. So thanks a lot, guys.
Leave the bugs alone.
But
Yeah,
like, so
they didn't
it's
take
this idea of
pictures of any
collective
bugs.
teaming, collective teaming. Like that is it's mobilizing mass numbers of people. Now, I'm not saying this game is doing it, like that this is a winning game, that, that's such a great game, they're definitely going to mobile. But like some of the stuff that I've looked at lately, like that Hollow Vista, and the thing that came, but Mesmer and Braid, that was the lead up to Hollow Vista. Like they want to create a slick and beautiful game that's like really high end, and that you will enter, and then across all of these platforms, like embed gaming mechanics that may or may not be doing what you actually think they're doing, right? Like you think that you're on a quest scavenger hunt for a thing, but like in the process, you're doing something else. And like the follow-up to this, the Mesmer Braid game and the Hollow Vista, they had one called,
I had that video out here as well, Mesmer Braid.
it was something like the Manual, like Arbitration League or whatever, and that it was only on for a month, and it had 1,000 people participate, but you had a caseworker, and the caseworker was a DAO essentially, or an AI, and there would be a task, and then you would have to do a scavenger hunt to come up with an object that would resolve the challenge, and then make a story about it, and then those stories got upvoted or downvoted, and then somehow the AI, and this was happening across like Discord servers and like social media portals and different things, like in multiple, like a non-linear thing, that people's collective stories that they were bringing into the challenge were then incorporated into a master narrative. But the weaving together of it, which is, to me, I keep thinking about weave, like the weaving of it was happening by AI. Like they were the ones that were doing the quote unquote sense making from all of these diverse contributions that had a participatory collective element to them. Like that they wanted people to join in the story and collaborate.
AI would,
and then somehow the AI was the one doing,
like from all the different platforms.
Yeah. So I feel like, and when I look at that, like someone would say, oh, that's a game. And I'm like, no, that is a teaming, that is a collective mind project. And I think in that space, it might have even been, there was some, what do they call it? Like the AI art stuff that was built into. So like, I feel like that a lot of this is both teaming and psychological probing. Like probing our inner psyches, because the third woman who was doing the narrative work on the Hollow Vista project, she had actually gotten her master's degree at Pacifica in like psychology, myth and Jungian psychology. And then she went to get a PhD at Carnegie Mellon, and she was working on live action role play in the human computing lab and gaming. And her thesis mentor was working on like managed behavior change through narrative arc storytelling. So I'm trying to remember if like within the Collectivo stuff, Leo, that you were like, you pulled a clip and you were, in it, he was saying, people who were upset over, social issues in part, who were causing property damage because they weren't invested in the property. They felt no ownership of the things that were being damaged. That problem could be remedied if you had Web3 and people felt ownership in the collective, right? In the collective story, in the collective thing that was being built. And so I feel like all of this is getting connected, like the gamification, the collective, the weird blending of what is work and what is play and what is reality, and what if the thing that you're doing when you're swiping isn't the thing you think you're doing when you're swiping, and then like how all of that is integrated with AI and like as this hive mind.
Yeah. When trying to understand this too, it's like people, there's so many layers and so many pieces and moving parts and whatnot, and everybody wants to like, oh, it's this or it's that, and it's like all these different things that are interacting with each other that makes it difficult. Oh,
I think you keep getting a little frozen.
You're breaking up, man.
Can you lower his transmission?
Well, I kind of, I have to lower everybody's, both of you. Let me lower it.
Okay.
Maybe that helps. Okay, Leo, you want to? we
yeah.
lost you there for
I
a
missed
second.
what you said.
Oh nope, he's frozen. Ah. You look peaceful though.
Do you want to go? You want to pull up the Dow paper?
Yeah, sure.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There you are.
You're still. We could hear you, but you're frozen. Bye, Leo.
So it might be.
We'll do email.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Well. Bye. Thank you, Leo.
Thanks.
Can we just close out? I just wanted to say this was the paper that I was talking about Ralph Merkle. I mean, not Ralph Merkle, Drexler, Eric Drexler, who was sort of at the cross of the Center for the Future of Humanity and effective altruism and AI governance and big data analytics. And is it possible to up down me a little bit so that I can see the document?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Leo's dropped off.
One moment.
And so this was last fall, I think. Yeah. So, sorry. No, it's not Drexler. It's Ralph Merkle. Okay. So he is another pioneer in the molecular engineering nanotechnology field. And actually
he came up with the Merkle tree.
Yeah, the Merkle trees. Yeah. So he's very high up in public key cryptography. So he's nothing to sneeze at. He's someone who's spent a career in cryptography and high level computing. And so again, it says they're tapping into the wisdom of crowds, which I think is exactly what is happening with these gamified platforms, is the wisdom and doing democracy as a DAO. And then can you just like scroll to the end, like where it has the acknowledgements? Because I just want to sort of point out, like it's a pretty extensive paper, and maybe we can link to it when we end up sharing the paper. But it has, the acknowledgements of whoever the other people who contributed. So Nick Bostrom, who's very much high level in sort of the concerns about like the singularity, but I guess sort of not stopping it, just saying like we're going to have a good version of it. Vitalik Buterin, Robert Freitas, who I believe was also in nanotech, Robin Hansen, who was the key figure with the Futarchy, Charles Hoskinson with Cardano, John O was the one person I was not so familiar with, and then Melanie Swan, who was the blockchain cloud mind lady. So, you've got some pretty key figures here in, Ethereum, in nanotechnology, in innovative governance, in, digital identity and blockchain identity, and, neurotech, right? Combined collective neurotech. So, when people are talking about these gaming platforms and cooperation and collaboration, they're not really being truly, like, they're using a certain language to make this seem normal, right? To make this seem acceptable. And if not only acceptable, but something we have to do to save the planet, to like enter into these mass minds. But what they're not really being honest about is the fact that these technologies are steeped in like decades and decades of very sophisticated psychological mind control and narrative control and full spectrum dominance information warfare control. Like we're invited in as though it's just a fun LARPy game, but it has the potential to be something a lot more complicated.
Did we ever? Did you show any of that video, the presentation that Merkle gave? Did you? I'm trying to remember if you've shown that video.
One at Stanford.
Yeah.
Or.
Well, I don't know where was that. The one where he
actually did a presentation at Stanford, I think in 2018, and Steffer sent it to me, but I haven't had a chance to watch that whole thing. I did spend time with the paper.
Oh, okay. I'm talking about this one. Because we might show this commercial. Yeah, Stanford. This is just a.
Yeah, that's from 4 years ago.
Okay,
so I haven't actually watched.
Oh yeah, I actually watched the whole thing. It was
okay.
Anyways, but yeah, okay. Well, next time we could even maybe show clips from this if you want.
Yeah, so a prediction market. So that's this idea of like actually using free market economics linked to public policy and what works outcomes. And like again, we're on a certain trajectory. We know the broad contours of the story, but these new pieces keep coming into place. Like why did we need what works government? Why did we need outcomes based? Well, oh, we need it because we need to create new financial markets for Goldman Sachs and Vanguard to bet on. Okay. Oh no, we actually also need it. So to use the impact data to train the AI. Okay. Well, now if we apply the same thing to not only the policy itself, but to the choosing of the policy. Oh, look, now we have another market that we can gamble on. And it's a psychosis. Like it's a sociopathic illness. I think that we have this reliance on technological progress that maybe looks good on paper, but in reality is completely dehumanizing and like a death to natural systems.
Yeah. I don't even think it looks good on paper. Yeah, no, it's a pretty interesting talk too. The guy is, it's not his stuff either. He's kind of just cheerleading for it. You know, he's
oh, well, you know what? Could we play? So do you see here, it says the Stanford Complexity Group. And so one of the other people at Stanford is Josiah Ober. And I've had my eye on Josiah Ober for a bit because he was informing, Jeremy Pitt. And Jeremy Pitt was the guy sort of pitching like, oh, we'll all live in our little villages with Linux servers in our basements and smart grids. And I guess that's pretty much probably this 15-minute city concept that people are all talking about. But he said that, you know, his frame was sort of like this, I don't know, socio-anarchist blockchain governance system. And that he was informed, his work was informed by Josiah Ober at Stanford. And Ober is a classicist, and his shtick is that essentially the Athenian city-states were superorganisms. And so he is using sort of a historical narrative to lay out the legitimacy of transitioning to like blockchain governance and coordination mechanisms for quote unquote cooperation. And so I pulled a quick clip from an interview with this guy. Gosh, I'm trying to remember his full name. His last name is Sloan, and he's part of a human energy project, and it's all framed within the noosphere, right? And I would just emphasize that within this noosphere, when I was on that IEEE webinar, you know, a month or so ago, when I mentioned Talar Desjardins and the noosphere, they like affirmed that I was on the right track. So that was something that was not incongruent with what the IEEE thinks about the metaverse. Like they're thinking about it in terms of, you know, I guess omega point, noosphere, and, you know, metaphysics.
Boom.
David Snorkel. The science of the noosphere is a project of human energy. We are investigating the scientific foundations of the noosphere to contribute to the third story.
I'm so happy to be talking with you. We've already have a long print conversation and podcast on this topic. But so you are a Greek scholar, classic scholar, and political scientist, right? I've learned so much from you about this ancient Greece from for me, an evolutionary perspective. And this project centers about the concept of organism and society as an organism. And I wanted to ask you, I think, two questions. One is the degree to which the Greek city-states were kind of an organism, and also how that was understood by the people at that time. The whole metaphor of society as an organism, of course, was present in people's minds, such as Aristotle and so on. So not only did the Greek city-states kind of qualify as an organism in ways that we'll get to, but also that's how people were thinking of it. So could you comment on that?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about a Greek city-state is first that these were indeed pretty tight collections of substantial numbers of individuals, anywhere from a few thousand to a few 100,000 individuals in a given city-state in an ecology of city-states. So by the time we're at the age of Plato or Aristotle, there's something like 1,000 of these around the Mediterranean. And so in some ways, like the ant colonies that Deborah Gordon studies, what we have is these individual groups which are cohesive. They act cohesively as, in some ways, quasi-organisms in an ecology of similar, as it were, quasi-organisms with which they both compete and cooperate. We have, I think, the key way of thinking about what goes on within the city-state as well as between city-states is the management of cooperation in the face of conflict.
Right, and so in strictly biological terms, what we have here is what would be called a metapopulation. We have a population of populations. You just said there were nearly 1,000, and that they're competing. They're in some sense replacing each other, and they're certainly trading information extensively, and they have a subsistence ecology. So it was very easy for me, with my ecological background, to appreciate what you were writing as, you know, definitely a multi-level evolutionary process. Evolutionary change, including cultural change, could take place within any one of these polities, and did, including of the disruptive variety. And I think that we could focus on that, but also extensively taking place between these polities.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, just the takeaway is that it's not just about coordinating, right, and to accomplish a task. It actually is situated within an evolutionary process. Like which in my mind is optimization and it's eugenics. You know, the progress of the human specimen into some other form is what they're after. So the coordination isn't the end goal in and of itself. It is through cooperating that we emerge into another phase of evolution of the human species, I feel like is what they're after. And again, you know, was it Terman, the first president of Stanford? Like, he was a member of the Human Betterment Project. Like, the first president of Stanford was a eugenicist. So the fact that, you know, we lose this history, or, you know, maybe it's marginalized and a few people know it, but we don't situate what Stanford is in terms of the center of impact finance, right? A center of high power computing, like a center of market logic and law, as a eugenics project. Because the eugenics project is going to be sold to us as wellness and longevity and personalized medicine. Yeah.
Well, the whole concept of the superorganism has always just thrown me off, because I'm always thinking of it in terms of you know, a biologic organism, but they're not talking about a biological organism. They're talking about some computational, like, synthetic thing that, you know, in terms of how the eugenics fit into that, you know, I still don't quite, where that delineation of the inside out computer, you know, thinking of a superorganism like as a metaphor for this thing versus like a literal, like, you know, because you're talking about, you know, the eugenics piece of it and like the betterment of, you know, creating better species, better evolutionary creatures. You know what I'm saying?
Better. It's an evolution. Like, right. It's like some people would argue it's better and some people wouldn't.
Right. Yeah.
Sort of transition. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, I would say the thing is, like, we're already a superorganism in and of ourselves, because, like, there's a huge amount of us that is functioning collaboratively within our biological processes that aren't of us, right? Like, we're already a host to billions and billions of little critters that are, like, you know, I remember being in middle school and seeing some film strip about, like, parasites that live at the base of your eyelashes and being totally freaked out, you know, like, in the way that only a middle school girl could be. But, like, this idea that we aren't even of ours. I mean, and they're looking to engineer that, right? Like, through gut, you know, microbiome engineering and things like that. So we already are kind of superorganisms, like, in and of ourselves, but it's creating connective tissue between us through energetic transactions. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, like Steffers and, you know, others would be able to make a strong case that those energetic associations are already there naturally, like, are being grounded on the earth, are being, you know, embrace of another person and transferring a heartfelt energy, and that toroidal field is already there, but there is going to be a mesh network installed to either co-opt or guide those existing natural energetics and to coordinate us en masse. So it's like a school of fish being a superorganism, right? It's like the flock, it's the stig merging, a flock of starlings being a superorganism, that they're acting in a unified manner towards a coherent goal oriented. And that's the cybernetics, right? It's a goal oriented program.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, well, I don't want to be in their superorganism.
We will be the excluded members from the game.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
probably already are.
We didn't even get to the excluded players clip.
Yeah. Well, hopefully Leo will have some time, and we can do a follow-up. Yeah, excluded. Step 1 of 4. Yeah, we would be excluded. Yeah. There you go, Jason.
Poof, you're gone.
Poof, the change is saved, and you are now excluded. Yeah. So if there's a way of saving the other clips, that would pretty, great. And I'm sorry for,
yeah, that's a bummer. It's a bummer.
I do think. Well, we'll keep going. I mean, I'm sure that Leo will have some time at some point because I do think that now with this backdrop, looking at what he was looking into with Collectivo as sort of a pilot project in Curacao, which is Dutch, by the way. So it's I've been trading emails with somebody lately about the whole Dutch East India Company. These things, these that's almost like an eternal organism, right? Like some of these things, the Crown, the Dutch East India, these structures.
Well, I was also thinking too, the tulip thing that always comes to mind, the whole Dutch tulip craze, because that's the whole crypto, the whole thing around crypto is all about, I always calling Bitcoin tulip coin.
Yeah.
But there was
and the
that
thing
whole
is, it's
aspect.
also the whole a lot of it is based in plant biology, like botany, and the discovery. A lot of, these imperial travels were done ostensibly for science, right? We want to go over there and see what they've got and bring it back. Yeah. So there is a logic to the fact that, the Netherlands are doing, a rise in these biodiversity, because it can be literally considered, I think, in the same way you might imagine 17th or 18th century, explorations of undiscovered lands to collect, in this case, it will be molecular structures, DNA signatures.
John Bartram was collecting, wasn't that his thing, Bartram?
Yeah, he had a subscription. So he traveled to up as far as upstate New York and then down to Florida and collected plant specimens, roots, seeds, and he packaged them and sent them to predominantly the English gardens. And he had a correspondence with Linnaeus. I mean, it's this whole group of citizen scientists, right? And now we're coming back to this new thing. But there will be the elite level scientists who are laying out the game, and then we'll be just the scrambling around ants, collecting the material to feed into the machine. It's not going to be a game where we're peers with the scientists.
Well, it was what was the woman the blonde woman that you were, and she's laughing about it. She's like, yeah, we're getting them to basically do all this, intern work,
I don't remember that.
I can't remember her name, but you've shown some clips of her just more recently.
Oh, Duetman, Alison.
Yeah.
Duet.
Yeah. So she's the one with the citizen science thing, but yeah.
Well, she was at the Forsyth Institute, which is Drexler, Drexler founded. I don't think he's still affiliated, but the fact that she's connected to the effective altruism movement, that was a real eye opener for me to understand the context of that movement in the space with AI governance and data analytics. And so not only is it Bentham-esque, but it actually really is using the science of charity to train the machines. And then what, Drexler's going to give it a new language, the language of, it's kind of hard to, I wish I could conceptualize it. I don't really have a framework for understanding what that machine looks like, but I do think that Is it Severed? Is that the name of the TV show?
Yeah,
Like,
I haven't seen it yet, but I should watch it.
well,
But yeah, it's called
there's
Severed.
the work that they're supposed to be doing is looking over these scans and scans of numbers, and they look like they're non-differentiated. Like they don't look like you would be able to find a pattern, but like you're supposed to feel into it. But the feeling isn't a good feeling; it's a bad feeling. And then so eventually, after a number of days of training, this woman finally sees something that she's supposed to grab these numbers and throw them in the trash can.
I'll check
And
it
so,
out.
yeah, it's
Interesting.
well. Anyway, so thanks for
Yeah.
setting it up.
Well, I'll save the deck, and we'll carry on. So we'll
Be
communicate. To be continued.
Yeah, to be
and-
continued.
And then we'll figure it out. All right. Thanks, Allison. All right. Continued.
For a little bit.
For just a bit. So yeah, I guess Allison's on the East Coast, so she's a couple hours later than me. I'm in Denver. So we're just going to do a quick, Leo couldn't make it with us, but we actually have a lot more content that we're going to be going over. We only got to just a small chunk of it that we were going to cover, as is typical.
I'm always like loading up the deck right the hour before, and this and this and this. So.
Oh yeah. Well, even today, Allison sent me an email, and she's like, 50 links. No, it wasn't 50 links, but I'm like, okay, no, I'm giving you shit. It was only 4 links.
Mean.
It was only
it's
4
always
links.
enlightening, right, Jason?
No, I'm definitely learning a lot in this process, and it's been a thrill. It's been thrilling, and I'm really grateful for all of you who are hanging in there with us. And I didn't actually see any questions come across the live stream, or the pre-record, but if you do have questions at this point, go ahead and throw them out there, and we will respond. But Allison, did you notice I grabbed some clips there from that Severed show?
That was good. You got the Severance stuff.
I hadn't seen it, so I went and started watching. I watched like the first 2 episodes and grabbed some clips from it.
Yeah, but it's interesting, this idea of like a non-traditional language or sensing into these data sets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even when I watched it the first time, I didn't know. Like, it's like you need so many exposures to actually start knitting it together, and
well, I think a lot about, even going back to 1984 or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and it's like they were kind of told in some ways things that are kind of coming, things to come. That was another one.
Yeah.
H.G. Wells. But just that, you look at these things as, it's a warning, but it doesn't actually serve that function. Even though we're like warned about the pitfalls of, particularly in science fiction, it doesn't stop us from moving forward. So the question is, are these predictive programming things in science fiction serving another function in order to maybe ease us into it, sort of thing? I don't know. You know what I mean?
It's more of like setting an intention than a warning. I don't know. Well, there's stuff that's the storyline is very overt. I haven't really watched Westworld, but people keep saying like that's a very overt messaging around it, maybe cautionary, and then there's a lot of stuff that's just subliminal. But I do think that it is sort of using the steganography as, that's a lot the work that Steffers does, is sort of deconstruct the subtext. But again, we don't have a language for it. Like, we don't have a language for what it means to do a job that involves feeling into big data sets of numbers, right? For the bad ones. We don't have a word for that. Maybe in 10 years, there'll be a word for it, and that'll be somebody's job on TaskRabbit, and everyone will know what that is. But we don't have that yet. And, that kind of goes back to this idea of, the concepts that Stephen Newcomb talks about, the people on the shore watching the big boats come in of the conquistadors or whatever, and they're not actually in the same cosmology. Like, their mental construct is not the same. And so you actually have to build a bridge, to actually have some shared understanding of the world. And sometimes terrible things happen before you can start to make sense of it and put words to it. So, and not always terrible. Maybe it doesn't have to be a terrible thing, but like, you have to sort of have some lived experience to start to actually have the language to talk about it.
Right.
And that's what science, so much of this, even, the stuff that we're doing, and, we've been doing for 2 or 3 years, we've been trying to, pull these videos out, and not that they're hidden, but for the most part, these things that we're looking at, and they're significant because you've been in spaces with, individuals and firms that have a lot of money behind them, right? Like, they may present as casual and informal techie people, but ultimately there's a lot of money behind building out Web3, building out extended reality. It shouldn't be disregarded. But they're not the ones being shoved in front of your eyeballs, right? Like, they're not the Joe Rogans. They're not the, whatever the thing is that they feel like you need to see. It's just simmering in the background, not totally hidden, but you have to actually have a guide. It's like going to a foreign city and you have like an insider to sort of walk you around and point out the things that are significant. And, so we appreciate the people, 50 at a time, and each one of you guys are valued, all of you 50 people who are watching.
Well, it's like there's a cap. I mean, it seems like there's a cap because the numbers are always the same. Even like you'll get new subscribers. I mean, and even the subscribers, your subscribers are kept at like new subscribers, 170 to 200 a month. So it's almost like because it's so consistent, I feel like it's just a programmed cap that was put in there of like, okay, we'll let you, hover around this space or whatever. And also too, I'll just say this too. It's, people are always like, well, I'm not, I've said this before. I send people these long videos and they're like, I'm not going to watch a 3-hour video or whatever, but you can't really understand this stuff unless you really sit with it too. It's like, yes, having the language and like knowing, because I send this stuff to really smart people and they're like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And I'm like, well, it's just because you're not familiar with the language.
Yeah.
They're using terminology that's not part of your lexicon. But even if you have the terminology to actually wrap your mind around what it means, what cybernetics means, what a cyber physical space means with tokenized behavior, you have to kind of sit with it. And I'm still sitting with it. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this because it's a completely different orientation than one that we've been conditioned and actually have been living in. I've talked a lot about that. Is the reason why it's hard for people to grasp this is because they're not actually experienced and living the stuff that we're talking about yet, but it's just like right around the corner. And so like I said, Alison, I was like, you're going to be vindicated. it's pretty soon here. But it's not going to be a celebration because unfortunately the vindication involves like, the reality that we've just set ourselves up for living in this nightmare dystopic world, happy world.
I know.
Forced happiness. I do see one question here. What was your interpretation of Tao as a spiritual concept? And I'm guessing it's Tao. It's DAU, but I think they might have just misspelled it. But Tao and its usage by the tech weirdos. So Tao is DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization.
I mean, I think I saw that the person said that they had a criticism of my take on it. So, and I'm open to, like, I'm not a specialist in, Chinese philosophy by any respect. So, I mean, my understanding was it about sort of the natural energetic flow of the universe, right? The yin yang, and Taoism and like it's the energy, it's the flow of energy. And so I feel like the cybernetics is a way of channeling a natural energetic flow into more of a mechanical circuit, like of logic. And so I think I mentioned in one of the last talks about like my sense about Confucianism was this idea of a social contract, which would be more like the smart contract logic. And that the Tao, the yin yang, the flow, the energy flow of the universe would be seeking to channel it into the circuits of the smart logic. And then the Buddhist reincarnation was this idea of complex adaptive systems being assembled for a particular purpose. And then a function happens and then they become disassembled and then reassembled. And so I put up a clip on my channel today. Someone had recommended this book to me called The Footprints of God. And it's a fictional book. And it's more of a it's not a religious book per se, but it's about quantum computing and AI. And at one point, this person in the story, the primary character is sort of, he equates it to like God wanting to be within the bubble of the real world. So not that he is God, but it's like with Jesus, like a candle lighting another candle. And so it's not diminished, but there's a second. And so he's just a regular guy who's been part of this AI experiment, but he's like channeling this larger force and this idea of like a tremendous mind trying to get in his tiny mind, which is the reason I clipped it, because it reminded me of the conversation I was trying to have with you guys about the language, right? This idea of something huge trying to be forced into too small of a space. And like within that, he came to the realization of like he could see the knitted fabric, like the energetic fabric of the universe, like beyond the material, even beyond like the next phase. It's like the deepest structures, which is more like the Tao. And I do like, I mean, I wrote this into a piece I haven't published yet, because I mentioned that to you and Leo. Now, Leo pointed out that actually these decentralized autonomous organizations were originally started out being called DACs, or decentralized autonomous corporations. Now we know, based on like the narratives that they're building out, that they were always going to move away from a corporation as a narrative, because we've already embraced this idea of post-capitalism, right? Like that's the whole narrative. We're supposed to say, okay, capitalism is over. It's the new thing, right? It's a cooperative, maybe so you could have a DA instead of a decentralized autonomous corporation. You could have a decentralized, autonomous cooperative, but ultimately it's an organizing tool. Like the cybernetics and the blockchain, I'm starting to actually really believe that maybe the blockchain is as much a language. Like it's a language structure that's attempting to become sentient, but it's like, just playing around with the thought forms. And so a DAO is actually very accurate, because the O is organizing. It's a decentralized autonomous organization, and it is about organizing. It's about ordering the chaos of life into a structure that is machine readable. So anyway, I guess that's my take, is that and Leo did mention that Rune Christensen, who is the head of MakerDAO, I think, which is one of these large DAOs, he actually, like, his formative years as a young man were in China, and his wife is Chinese. So it would be something he's familiar with. And I mentioned too, if you look up the Hanson Robotics logo, the Hanson Robotics logo is a hexagram. Which is for you, I think, which is 16. And it looks like an H. So it's like a H, but it's a hexagram. And it's, I think U stands for like thunder and setting many armies of helpers in motion, which is pretty much exactly what like these Sophia the robots are going to be, is like a blockchain mind army. So anyway, those are my thoughts on DAO and the Tao and energy and Berggruen, I've mentioned, not just Berggruen, many Western interests have been pouring money into China and AI. And, I don't feel like, at least at the level of the development of this stuff, it's as separate as they would want us to think, as much as a competition as they might want us to think.
Yeah, it's funny that when you sent that Greg Iles, the
Yeah.
author, I actually read a couple of his books back in my early 20s. He's a really good author, actually, but he wrote a book called Spandau Phoenix, and it's about it's like an alternative history book, like what if, like it's kind of like what if this had happened. And it was Rudolf Hess who was the second in command at the Nazis, and the story was he actually like survived, and it was his double that was captured in Spandau. Anyways,
Wow.
and he runs a big corporation, like the Nazis. But we've always talked about this, the idea that like the Nazis didn't lose the war. But actually, he's a really good author. I was kind of like, oh wait, Greg, I haven't read his books in years. I've read a couple of his books over the years. But
somebody said, "Oh, Alison, you should read this." So I'm working on my next quilt for Cliff, and so that's what I was listening to while I've been trimming fabric.
Interesting. Yeah, I was wondering how that got
that
on your
little
radar.
clip. I want that. I want to save that, because that's kind of what I'm trying to say.
Is your interpret? Oh wait, we already did that one. Do you think the Ohio train derailment, My ID bracelets, is an event that has woken some sleepers? Do you sense that people are picking up on the plot? Picking up the plot. What is your analysis of the events? Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I mean, I've been in sort of email correspondence with Steffers, and she's pointed out a number of things about that event. Additionally, I guess early on there was a key person in the interviews by the last name of Ratner who had a number of connections and then was also in the movie. So I actually happened to watch The White Noise, the movie, like the night before, like right around the time it happened, which was kind of odd to me because in the movie there's a specific reference to a simulation event. Like that's kind of like a key like climax point where the guy's told he's going to die, but the guy taking the data actually has a simulation armband on. And he's like, are we in a simulation? And it's like, well, we would have arranged the bodies better if we were actually in the simulation. So, but I don't know, like if the awake, the asleep story, like, I mean, to me that, I don't know, like, I think we should be like thoughtful.
It's kind of finite. It's kind of a finite thing, you know, it's like, I think about my progression.
About stories, like what story are we living in? And to get to a place that you would like could wrap your mind around, that most of the mainstream media, that many of the people that we have come to, like normal people would come to rely on as sources of information, and the whole world is maybe not what we think. Like it takes a certain mindset to be able to look at that and then make sense of it. I mean, because, you know, we've been living through 3 years of outrageous things happening, right? And then people somehow coming to terms with finding ways to justify it. So, I just think back, for me, it was comforting when Mohita read my chart and I said, you know, what's the audience for this? And she said, Alison, you know, the vast majority of people who are here in any given time are living in their lower chakras, which means it doesn't mean that they're worse people. They're just living in their material physicality. They're not living in a higher plane to see it. So it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It's just they're not actually here for that part of the purpose. And so, you know, once you kind of get to that point, well, then maybe you're just there to do the work, but not to have giant masses of people figure it out, because they're not actually equipped to. They don't, just like we can't sense odors the way a dog can sense, you know, people have a different sensibility. So I mean, it's frustrating, but I think this, you know, red pill, blue pill, woken, like they gave us this language, like this language has been developed. Like, where did it come from, right? How do we pick this stuff up for the ways of framing this conversation, right? Because it has become almost a meme or a trope, or this is just a structure for what we say about people that are living. And for me, I think the centerpiece of storytelling is really, really huge. I think this idea of immersive storytelling, collective storytelling, like how much of a story like is true or not true, or the sources, and the psychological implications, it's going to get really complicated, because literally they would like for us to live in a delusional state. I mean, they really are working really hard to make us live in a state where moment to moment, we don't know what is actually really real and what is not real. And one of the simulation platforms I've been looking into, this Conductor Platform, the other morning, I was looking through their video channels, and one of their recent videos said they're using the AI chat thing, to like develop the scenarios for their simulation modeling. Now, again, these companies pitch themselves as like, oh, we just do sandboxes, but I'm not so sure, right? And so what happens when we start having AI run virtual simulations that are almost as good as the real thing? So I guess I just don't know what the purpose is of the idea of people waking up, like to how much of the story. At this point, we're so far out, Jason, like I don't know that people, I mean, even my husband, he's like, I don't have time to catch up with you. Like I would have to spend the next decade reading all of the stuff to catch up. And he's not going to do that. He's not going to, like, he has other things to do with his time. So I don't know. Like, I don't know what we're doing.
Well, I think there's different degrees of being woke or whatever. Like I think about my history of like how I've started, changed my perspective, and I learned about this, and I had to kind of pivot and, oh, I've got to incorporate this new thing in there. And like a lot of the stuff, that's even happening now with, talking about, blackmail and intelligence services and corruption and all that stuff is real and is actually important to understand. But it's almost like then there's another layer on top of that that isn't being incorporated into it. So like so for me, it's like, it's frustrating because, starting with the monetary system, I'm like, okay, once you understand how the monetary system works, it totally changes the discussion about all these other issues dealing with politics and all this other stuff. And then now, like the more recent thing is, once you understand cybernetics and Web3, it changes the conversation. And then, so, we're trying to have this conversation that's incorporating this new information. And the majority of people, even in like alt media spaces, are still having the same conversation they were having 3 years ago, and it's not to say that that's not an important, I think a lot of the stuff that they're talking about is actually really crucial for understanding, the world that we live in. But it's not the end. It doesn't end there is the only thing, so it's like there's different degrees and different layers of this.
Well, and I think this idea, I'm still struggling. I have a young adult child who's pretty much isolated themselves from me because I think for now that my existence in this like questioning is a threat to their like identity in the world, right? Like they're in this formative state of like finding an identity, and my questioning, like not everyone is willing to be able to like like psychologically be able to step out away from like groups, right? Your identity is constructed by yourself in relation to your neighbors or the people you go to school with, or your friends group, or your church, or the people you go to work with, whatever. Like you have to be able to be willing to be yourself outside of that, like not necessarily antagonistic to that, but you have to be able to walk out away. And I have like my material reality is stable enough that I can do that. And psychologically, I feel like I'm prepared to do that because I want to know, what happened to us the last 3 years. Like I want to know really what it was. Right. And there's levels, right? Like the level where we were at, when you first interviewed me was at one tier, and then it keeps going deeper and deeper and broader. But not everybody is equipped to do that. And for some people that's really threatening. So to even acknowledge that first thing, like they can't, because the implications of once they do that one, then it all unravels, right? And I think that's the thing for my child is they thought I chose this over the family. Now, there was never a discussion in that way that had happened, but like sometimes you walk out of the cave, and then if you do try to go back in the cave and talk about what you saw out there, like it's very unsettling to everyone. But nobody tells you like at the threshold that you cross out of the cave that you can't go back. And I think but there are some people maybe who sense the tension, probably especially after the last 2 years. Like, okay, I might be willing to accept that these things that I once understood, I would in retrospect assess them differently. But they know that once that chip falls, that many other things will fall too, and they're just not prepared to walk that road. They're just, doesn't make them worse people. They're just not there. So, and I literally, as we move forward, I think that with this crazy reality that they're building, this hybrid blended reality, like what is real? Like, what are we even going to know what the real story is? Like, I like at this point, I feel like everybody has to be out on their own reconnaissance, because we can't do it for anybody else. We can really only do it for ourselves, and we can help each other along the way if we find, like-minded people. But I think we shouldn't be too, in retrospect, I think about like the past year and me getting off of Twitter and Facebook, and I was really mad. Like I was really frustrated. I let it get me very frustrated that people couldn't understand. I took it as personally, as if my personal failing or as a failing of others, that it wasn't moving, that we weren't progressing. And then like at this point, it's not always easy, but I'm trying to practice like a radical acceptance of just where it is. Like
It's the only
it's
way
like
you can do it, I think.
like phases of letting go. You know?
Yeah, it's the only way. It's the only way you're going to be able to move forward. Because you don't
Yeah.
have control over anybody else, nor would you want to have control over anybody else.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's funny because it in a way it like requires faith, not in a
Yeah.
religious sense, but just a faith that truth will out, I guess is what they say. Yeah. Someone asked, you still maintain a glossary of terms so that folks can have access to it?
I'm busy
There's one in the works.
If anyone wants to pick that up, that'd be great.
Well, we have one started, actually, but
the thing is, like, I keep finding new things. So, like, this whole thing about complexity theory and Futarchy and, I'm kind of embarrassed because, like, honestly, like my early, glossary was all the stuff. Now I'm like, oh, I don't think it was really about that. Like, or like it was about that as a stepping stone to something else. But if you got stuck on like the glossary that I put out, I was trying to put together a year and a half ago, it's evolved so much since then. So,
yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe we should try to, like, on our videos, like, what was that? Like, it pays to improve your word power. Like, Reader's Digest used to have this little section. It pays to improve your word power, and then they would have like 10 words.
Yeah.
Or like, what is it, like the electric company or something? We could like have
I'll have a little cartoon character
video.
kind of run across the street. Today's word is
words to, like, spelling words. Here's your 10 concepts for the week. Like, maybe I could start that on a blog. Here's 10 concepts every week.
And I'm trying to keep up with the questions. There's some conversation happening. So if you do have a question, just put the word question in front of it. That way I can pull it out easily. Someone asked, do you know anything about the pre-blockchain work done on distributed decentralized computing if it relates to early smart contracts?
I mean, well, for me,
you mean like
I
Scott
don't know
Stornetta or something? Like,
yeah,
I don't
like,
quite get what the question is, but
I mean, the Ricardian stuff, are you talking about like Ian Griggs stuff or Scott Stornetta? I mean, I can't say that I've done like encyclopedic work in that because often I'll be in a certain research path. But, and Leo's talked about this too, but I think it's really important that, Stuart Haber and Scott Stornetta's early distributed ledger work was about time stamping documents. And so I do think increasingly that there is going to be something about synchronization and timing and time machine type stuff that's related. And I thought I actually had a pretty good concept of it, this idea that, like, if you're going through immersive worlds that are set up as files, right, that you have tokens to access, like, you're going to need the timestamp to get back to it in time, because what we're experiencing is 4 dimensions, right? It's going to be a 4-dimensional experience. Immersive reality is that extra dimension. So yeah, like, knowing not just where is it, but when is it is going to be important. And I think on some of these things with the ledger, especially with the sensor technology that Leo's been talking about in terms of like ecosystem sensing, like, it's almost like they want to be able to run it backward and then project it forward. So, in the context of that, cesium conversation about the NVIDIA presentation, where they literally said, like, oh, once you get enough data in the blockchain, like, you can run it like a time machine. And I think that there's this stuff like the Markov principles. You'll have all these different trajectories, and then there'll probably be an optimized trajectory or they might say, like, hey, you can explore alternate futures, right? Here, just come into our simulation and you can see what happens. I mean, just the book you just said, like, what if this thing happened instead of that thing, right? Or the person got captured or they didn't get captured. It is like a choose your own adventure, only run on high quantum computers. I'm not saying it's happened already, but I can see that that's where it could be going. So anyway, and then the thing about Ian Grigg was Ricardian, like his connections to Vinay Gupta at Materium. and working on the Ricardian smart contracts, because it was quite a while of me being into looking at blockchain and smart contracts before I realized that the Ricardian ones are the ones that have the force of law. So you can have a smart mechanism that's like token enabled or sensor enabled that has like a binary yes, no, or on off type of thing in a built environment or a financial transaction. But it doesn't have a force of law. Like if there's a smart contract connected to your car key and your car, like if someday you go and they decide to, that you're not allowed to drive somewhere, like that could be a smart contract, but it might not be legally enforceable. But in trading products like derivatives or securities or things, that was first step of what they wanted to set up legally, because you want to have legal recourse if someone screws you over on that kind of contract. And so, increasingly smart contract law is going to come into play, not just smart contracts as an Internet of Things technology. So what Ian Grigg, like he was early in the space, and I think he was working in maybe the DigiCash space early on and like the gold backed digital currencies. But he's a very interesting character. So those are the two people that I'm, most familiar with early on. I know there's like a whole big set, and honestly, that's something I should, if people are interested in that, like Raul has a whole series, and his focus now seems to be more on crypto stuff, more specifically than Web3 and the impact space. So I would just direct you over to Silicon Icarus, and like there's a whole thing about the early time of like crypto code stuff.
Yeah, well, with smart contracts, I've thought a lot about this with policing and legal enforcement, that the need for that is reduced dramatically because it's automated. Like it's connected to your bank account. You get sued, your money just disappears. Your smart contract doesn't allow for the car to your Uber car to show up to your house, or for you to get the ride share or whatever. You just don't get the ride share.
Yeah.
So it's like there's another layer on society that's automated, that has policing built into it, that so you don't need, you don't even need the old forms of legal enforcement. They'll still have that, of course, but also back on
it's more Black Mirror, I feel like it's more that level. And it's sort of like once the control system, the smart contracts become invisible and then they're normalized, like it'll just be what the world is, right? Like there'll be this transition point of chafing against it. And then at some point people will just resign themselves to like accommodating it. And I mean, the thing I struggle with a little bit, like in the resistance space, I feel like because these social media feeds run on anxiety and strong emotion, like there is a financial and also like just reciprocal feedback to keep these systems of inflamed emotion like going on. I think the narratives around the totalitarianism, in somewhat like this idea of a totalitarian control that is just out in front like an iron fist, obscures the fact that there's going to be the velvet glove version, right? Like that there's going to be a softer version, and that I do think that within the complexity setup of these machine learning, there will be nuance and differentiation of available, that they don't actually want a homogenous totalitarian global population, that they do want some varieties, and that they do want you to not fight it all the time. Like I feel like it's going to be more Brave New World than 1984, like that paradigm. And and maybe to get into the Brave New World, like there's a lot of soma in it, that's the ketamine, the psilocybin, and the cannabis, right? To get people into just like giving into it. And they'll be like thrashing around at the beginning, and then people will go there. But I don't think it's going to be like a soft coup, like a gradual, like the tentacles, with some shock doctrines. I mean, I'm not saying that there's not going to be ever any sort of big things that are just like, whoa, but I don't think it's going to be one rolling blow, iron-handed fist over after another. I think it's going to be a combination. And if we don't understand the ways in which they're going to use the amount of data that they have on us to push our buttons and to tell us what we want to hear and to validate us and to get us to walk along the road, like it would, of course they're going to use all of that, right? To me, it seems very logical. It would be profoundly illogical to have 10 or 15 years of data on most every adult in the world and not use it to get people to go along and tell them the story that they want to hear to get them to do what they want.
Well, and back to like what's real, it's like everyone can have their own customized perception of reality that's crafted towards their own personality. And so like maybe some people will get the Brave New World version, and then some people might get the end up getting the dash of 1984. Let's see. What's the best way to contact you? Wrenchingthegears.com. She's got a contact page on there. Do you keep research bibliography?
I mean, really, my maps are my bibliography. I mean, on all of those huge maps that I include, and I have a lot of embeds. I wish, actually, you know what, Jason, I probably need to make a page on the blog that just has the master link embed to like all the different big maps I've made, because I don't really have a landing place for that. Yeah. Because I probably have about 8 pretty big substantial maps that I have. And then in all of those, I include the source link for the dot, if you click on the dot, and then a lot of those articles and supporting materials are either linked or I save them on my blog, and then I have a link to where they are on the blog. So,
and these are resources that people can use. So like if someone wanted to make a video and like here's an idea, make a video maybe with some friends of yours that are exploring some of this, and say, hey, let's just record ourselves and explore one of Alison's maps and just randomly start picking things and like digging into them, because I mean, it might be a fun way to do some research with people, because there's all these, the work that you've done. Yeah. The work that you've done on these maps is like pretty intense. Like, actually, I think I've got,
well, I was just talking with somebody today and I ended up sending a bunch. I forgot about this map. Like, this is one that we were, I made earlier on about University College London. But then when I was poking around today to give it to someone else, I thought, oh, okay, so let me, I noticed that there was a really, and it's funny because sometimes you hit upon these things and you know that it's interesting, but you don't know all of the stuff. You don't know exactly what's going on with it. So it was this Finnish art project, and it involved like a local currency and mapping social relations. And we found this report. This was maybe 10 years ago. And the report was so sad because the people, like the project totally failed. And this community that was on this tiny island that was like a UNESCO heritage site in Helsinki were totally skeptical of the researchers, and they didn't want to participate in the project, and the whole thing got undermined. And so it was like a 100-page report saying like, and then we tried this, and then we tried this, and it all failed. But it was built off of a project around ALETS. What did they call it? Local economic
trade systems.
The T is the trade system. So like all the kind of stuff like that, like the Catherine Austin Fitts crowd, is promoting, but in Amsterdam, and where they applied some sort of like transit pass RFID chips onto local notes. It was called the Bilgen. I don't know. Can you look it up, Jason? The BILJ. If you put it in the search bar, it should come up. The Bilgen dollar, and I think BILJ. It should come up, like, or B, or put in dollar maybe. It should come up if you type BI maybe. Yeah.
No, I tried dollar.
No. Okay, maybe you can't do it. Or it's in the bottom. It's near the bottom. I don't know. Anyway,
okay.
Well, we'll go over this next. This is the one. Okay, so I think I saw somebody asking about the food forest DAO. Yeah, it's in there that way. And so Leo's been doing a lot of work about the environmental impact space and the natural, like agricultural ties into social impact finance and Web3 and environmental stuff. And so one of the early prototypes actually is on the island of, do you say Curacao? And which is a Dutch, like formerly Dutch colony or affiliated with the Netherlands, which the Dutch are all connected to all of this stuff. And
Here it is.
so they're doing a local currency that is attached to the food forest. And, it's really interesting to hear them talking about like managing liquidity and emergencies, and that they're a cybernetics lab. So it's very clear to me that, these early prototypes as little, arts projects or cultural projects are really meant to grow into something much larger. So I'd really like to walk back through this map along with Leo and look at the work he's doing with, it was called Collectivo with a K, like KOLE
TIV. Yeah.
TIVO, Collectivo with
yeah.
2 Ks.
With a K.
And it was connected to Curve Labs as well, and Cello. So it's a test bed because they always go to islands or like small out of the way locations to do these projects. And again, it being affiliated with the Netherlands. So yeah. Oh, the Bilgemer Euro. Yeah. So, okay. So there you've got the Collectivo, and that's what Leo was mentioning about the badges. So I'd like to compare, like revisit this project in Finland and this Bilgemer Euro and the RFID traceable money. So that's 2010, right? That's 12 years ago. That's really, that's a long time in Web3 space since then. So anyway, yeah.
Back to the map. Okay, so I just, are you familiar with the college textbook Human Energies, Emerging Tech and Future Systems 5?
No. I mean, the thing is, there's so much out there. Like, I kind of follow what, like, is on the trail that I'm doing and see what stories it tells and see if I can kind of tell a story that would resonate with other people, and then they can pull in the stuff that they see in their part of the world. Because that's how I use my maps mostly is, I just keep peeling it back and then looking at the people involved and looking at their LinkedIns and what conferences they go to and some of the videos, and then figuring out, well, what story, like, is there a subplot to the master narrative that I have, right? And right now, and the master narrative has changed, right? Like Jason, when we, you first filmed me, my master narrative was like, okay, this is late stage capitalism and we're dealing with human capital, bond markets, and technology, right? And I knew that blockchain was part of it, like, but I saw it as a way of creating these bonds, right? That was my primary focus. And then
which is a part, but that's a part of it.
Yeah, it's a part of it. And then the next part is, oh, this is Web3. Okay, Web3 is part of the blockchain, but it's about building extended reality, right? So I'm not going to call it the metaverse. I'm going to call it extended reality or spatial reality, and mixing the sensor network. So, and that was another level. And then it's like, okay, so we didn't really have the handle on cybernetics. So then we get cybernetics under our belt. Okay, so cybernetics is using the sensor networks as a steering mechanism, as a governing mechanism. And then, so you get that under your belt, then you add in complexity theory. And you're like, okay, so it's not just steering, but it's steering individual units as agents, and coming up with rules, because it's too hard to steer all the individual agents. So if we can just come up with some rules that the agents operate under, then we can get them to steer themselves, right? Which is kind of what the smart contracts are. Like we'll create a world built on smart contract logic, automated logic, game mechanics, and token engineering. And then you can just bumble around in there like the Pac-Man or the Frogger or something and steer yourself through the game, right? And so I don't know what this next thing is. And people have asked me like, oh, again, are you doing the glossary? Are you writing a book? And I'm like, I'm just doing the next thing. Because that's what drives me. Like if I were trying to make money or write a book or do a thing, like I would stop and then consolidate it all. But right now I'm still on the hunt for what this thing is. And, and that's not even to include eugenics, right? Because that's still a focal point, optimization, the global superorganism, right? This eugenics-based optimization through machines into a global consciousness, this noosphere. So we'll have to see. Like, well, I think we're still planning to do California in April or May, and then we'll see what comes after global superorganism. I don't know.
I'm sure something. I still love that edit too, where it was Michael Crow. I don't know what it means. It means something.
It means
That was like the perfect edit. Do you have insight on how they bring people up to speed on the world they are creating? Most people don't even understand crypto. So I guess, I don't know. I don't think the question is to us how we bring people up to speed, but how they're going to bring people up to speed. I mean, I don't know. Like, think about how quickly people can change. Just look at the past 3 years and the reorientation. And they brag about, like, I was just watching another Mark Andreessen thing recently, and he was just like, ecstatic about like how amazing he's like, quickly people could get used to just working from home and doing school from home and doing everything from home. And actually we should actually pick apart, or maybe I will if you don't have time, but like that video that I sent you, Alison, with Andreessen and Mark or Newman. The
WeWork guy.
The WeWork, because there's a new thing called Flow. The WeWork. You think that you have
called
like
Flow? Oh,
yeah,
wow,
his Adam Newman's new company is called
that's
Flow.
pretty out in the open, isn't it?
Right, exactly. So that's the thing. You have Adam Newman. There's a documentary on Hulu about
So maybe with Flow, it's more like the slime mold than the ants, because like I don't know, the ants flow. I would think that the slime mold would flow more than the ants.
Yeah, I don't know, but they're basically getting into housing and making your housing experience like amazing, because you're gonna live at home, you're gonna work at home, and you're gonna, so they're getting into real estate, but it's a continuation of what the Wii stuff was. So it's like almost like these things are set up to fail, but they serve a function in terms of R&D, in terms of probably channeling money into other stuff. And then also getting these ideas out there, I guess, because you would think someone like Adam Newman, who did WeWork, which was supposedly this monumental fail, and then all of a sudden, boom, he's back doing another thing. Like I know, like I get punished pretty harshly when I fail, even in the business sense.
But once they understand, like that the actors, right? This idea that it's a spectacle. Right. And that's why, I've said, it's been a bit, but like this book, The Magus, the John Fowles book, Fowles, Fowles. It's a 1960s book, but essentially it is sort of like a mass psychological experiment that involves like a play, a mask, actually MASQUE, that starts to blur reality and fiction. And then towards the end, there's some sort of crescendo where it comes into sort of more of a psychological interrogation. But that's really starting to be what it feels like, especially with some of this AI stuff. And I know we had conversation about that, but like a probing, like a probing of your psyche for all of this stuff. Yeah. And then once you realize that, oh my gosh, like most of the stuff you see is, again, not that none of it's real or that it's like totally false, but it's definitely engineered so that you're supposed to. It's like a magic trick. Pay attention to this, and while I do this over on the side, right? And that's what they're doing.
Well, I'm waiting for Sam Bankman-Fried's comeback. We know it's coming.
Maybe he'll come up. He'll do the digital commenting. He'll say, "You're right. Like I should have just stuck with the commenting, the common good." And he'll work with his law school professor parents on the digital democracy.
Yeah. Something.
I'm not doing money anymore, guys. I'm just going to do some democracy tokens.
What would it take to get you to speak to my community? I don't know, Alison, you want to say anything? We go ahead.
I'm not sure where your community is. Are you in California? We're going to come to California.
We are going to be in California in April, May.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, like the speaking stuff, like, I mean, the online speaking, I'm just kind of, I don't know, email me, pitch me. I mean, I'm not doing so many interviews because I at this point, I feel like originally I did like interviews with other people under this idea that reaching their audience or them would make a difference in how the overall narratives were going forward. And I just got really disappointed after 2 years to realize that pretty much all the people, like many of the people whose programs I was on, like some of them repeatedly, like never actually were able to incorporate anything I said into anything moving forward.
Yeah.
And
They're still
I'm not
stuck in
aiming
the
to be
other
an influencer.
story.
Like I don't know why, but like then it was just a waste of time, right? Because I'm not really, it's not changing. It's whatever. I mean, I'm set up to feel like if you do that you want, like, and I know you should just, radically accept whatever happens, but like that there's some purpose behind it. But then when after 2 years you realize there really wasn't, then for me, I feel like I'm just going to do it over here on my channel, and people will get out of it whatever they get out of it, the 50 people who can hang out with us. And that'll have to just be what it is. But if you're near Philly or you're in California or something else, like who knows, things happen. Actually, I will say, if for anybody who might be listening in who is in the New York City area, I am coming up to New York City to meet up with some friends who are presenting, and anyway, so I'll be in like March 5th through the 10th or something, like maybe not quite that long, but the week of the 5th. Like, so if you're interested in the middle of the week and you want to hang out during the day, because I'm going to be doing stuff with them in the evening, but you want to do some intentions, like I was thinking maybe of going to the Lucius Trust building or outside, or maybe the Bloomberg Philanthropy, some of the things that I'd been meaning to do a long time ago and I didn't do. So if, here's a shout out, if you're in New York and you want to hang out in the second week of March, email me.
Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah. So yeah, reach out. Allison's got a contact email on her.
Timpsila, TIMPSILA @protonmail.com. That's, or you can find it on the blog on the contact page. And
cool.
Yeah.
Well, I know that you're tired, Allison. So do you want to?
I'm just kind of tired today. Yeah.
No worries.
But so, like, again, I wanted to have this conversation because I want to surface this interconnection of the Web3, token engineering, quote unquote, democracy innovations, gambling markets, and the impact finance space and the cybernetics. Because I would think most people, they're not making the connections between, and then ultimately we didn't get to it in this one, but the connection of biology into all of that, the linking of biophysics and with financial markets and betting, because that is the somebody asked, I put up the Eric Weinstein clip on my channel last week, both a shorter 8-minute clip and then a longer, maybe 20-minute clip. And I feel like it's really important. Now, this is something I feel like is important. I don't understand all the ways it's important right now, but that was at a conference in Waterloo, Ontario, at this Perimeter Institute of Theoretical Physics. And it was this man, he was proposing a Manhattan Project for economics. And a good chunk of that talk in which he was proposing that was trying to get interoperability between like biophysics and econometrics and math, like trying to apply physics and math and biology all together. And then, his brother Brett, of course, both with the intellectual dark web stuff and the game B, is an evolutionary biologist. So it is going to be this thing of like, how can we use markets to, and I'm sure at this point, like there are probably some people who are doctors out there that use game theory and genetic algorithms to develop precision treatments for personalized medicine. Like I hands down, I'm sure that this is already happening. And I'm not saying that in and of itself is evil, but I think that if we don't understand it within like world sensorium, this evolutionary imperative since the 18th century to optimize humans for some sort of other life form, and we haven't agreed. Like we haven't all agreed. Like I think I've said before, if someone just came up and said, "Hey guys, we have it on good authority that an asteroid is going to destroy the Earth in 10 years from now. So we all have to get our blockchain mine files in order and like put ourselves on a spaceship and go into deep space, or the poles are going to shift, or some terrible thing is going to happen. So I know it sucks that you were born in this moment, but we all have to do this and whatever. And then we would agree or not agree. That would be one thing, but that's not how this is going down. This is happening. And I think someone asked, like, how would they get people to get into this? I think they're going to gamify it. I think it's going to be a storytelling game. Like, I mean, they have the best people, right? Like Pixar, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg. They're going to sell you an amazing narrative to invite you in, and then to give you a pile of tokens to say, we need you. Uncle Sam needs you. The metaverse needs you. Web3, right? Like, here's the game. And like, when you listen to what Kevin Werbach is saying, he's saying the best games teach you how to play within the game. So like the first stages, the levels of the game are to have an intuitive interface that you learn through trial and error how the game works.
Yeah, the game is to learn the game initially.
And initially, and if it's seamless, if it's not too difficult, you'll do it. If it has the right incentives, right? If it has the right engineering of the tokens. And to think, I mean, they've been working on this for probably 50 years, these games and game theory. So they're pretty good at it. I mean, they've gamed a whole lot of people already.
Yeah.
And this is not even to mention like Hollywood and the simulation industry and NVIDIA. They're good at it. So, I think they'll just invite you in through the game.
I was going to show you. Just for kind of a fun visual. I went to there's a place called Meow Wolf here in Denver. They have them in a few different places, but it's like a interactive art space. I actually have several friends who've put some artwork in there, and so I went to a show there, and I went to check it out recently. But they had this interactive thing where there was like this light was following you as you walk around. So I grabbed a video. It's not a very good quality video, but I grabbed a video because it was a kind of a nice visual of so I don't know if you can see there, but like when you walk around, the light follows you around. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what they're building in our world. We're going to have
your own bubble.
Oh, wait, let me switch it to here. That's another one. Yeah, but yeah, the light was interactive. I mean, I've done I was a VJ for many years, so I've done a lot of stuff where the light and the video can interact with. You can use cameras.
But see, I feel like some of that is going to be this new language. Like, I think that there's ways of communicating like this stuff that's, I don't know. Like, I mean, even remember what was it, the Tom Cruise movie with the pre-crime Minority Report, right? And he's like up in front of a screen with these, moving stuff around. Like, I feel like there's going to be ways that are beyond alphabetic language.
Yeah. Definitely. Anyway, so yeah, I think that's a good stopping point.
Yeah. So we're going to plan another follow-up with Leo because, like I said, he has a lot of good, more material. I know that he has a lot of stuff in a backlog of stuff that he's going to be putting out. And I do too. So please, I would say, yeah, I'm really interested in feedback on the series that I have, the God's Eye View. It's like 4 parts so far. It's going to be probably about 15 parts total. And, I have to do this because I feel really strongly like I'm driven to do it, but it's nice to know that there are people out there who I don't know. It's challenging to put it out and then to not really know if anyone's getting what you're trying to say, because for me it's a process. Like, it's a back and forth. I don't have it dialed in. It's not like I'm an official journalist and I've got the thing and I've nailed down the case and I've got the hot scoop and I've breaking the story. It's more a thinking out loud through really complicated concepts that I'm not really equipped to, but in the absence of other people doing it, I'm kind of jumping, not that there's no one else doing similar work, but I'm thinking through it out loud, and I would love to think through it out loud with some other people. So,
yeah. Great. Well, thanks a lot, Allison, and thank you all for joining in. And we'll do another one of these probably, I'm imagining, within the next week, because we have a lot of other content here. So, yeah, tune in. We'll let you know. And then check out Allison's website, wrenchinthegears.com. And yeah, it's God's Eye View is the name of the series.
Yeah.
It's a really great series. So, anyways, thanks everyone.